The worthy fate. On a dark night without a single star in sight, the sound of barking dogs echoed from behind the Li family's village. Shortly thereafter, everything became quiet again. A month later, Li Xuan Xin's wife was yelling early in the morning, "Who is the murderer that stole our chicken?" Li Xuan Xin's wife was notorious for her scolding, and no one dared provoke her on a normal day. Today, this fierce woman was causing a scene early in the morning, promising an entertaining spectacle. Curious onlookers peeked out from their yards, eager to find out who had the guts to anger this shrew. "Who would dare steal your chicken? Are you sure you didn't wake up too early and see things?" someone teased. "Who are you calling blind? There's blood on the ground. Or are you going to say it's your pee?" Hearing Li Xuan Xin's wife, everyone burst into laughter. "Ha ha, Li Ni Kao, are you still peeing in other people's yards?" Li Ni Kao turned red with embarrassment, speechless. Someone nearby spoke up. "Xuan Xin's family, early this morning, I saw Li Batu's dog with blood on its mouth running past." Li Batu was a widower, too poor to have enough to eat, and with a limp. No woman wanted to marry him, so he lived alone in a shabby straw hut at the end of the village, rarely speaking to anyone. Mentioning Li Batu, people realized they hadn't seen him in a long time. However, since he seldom went out, no one paid much attention. Without much thought, Li Xuan Xin's wife, hearing that La Tu's dog had blood on its mouth, immediately concluded that it had killed her chicken. She grabbed a stick and, cursing, headed towards Li Batu's house. "Li Batu, your dog is something else, daring to harm my chicken. I'll kill it and make soup." Li Xuan Xin's wife shouted as she reached Li Batu's house. When no one answered, she pushed the door open and entered. The crowd following the commotion saw Li Xuan Xin's wife push the door open and then fall silent, standing as if petrified. A foul stench wafted out as the door opened. "Oh my God!" Regaining her composure, Li Xuan Xin's wife screamed, "There's a dead body!" At her scream, everyone hurried to look inside. They saw Li Batu's corpse lying beside the table, his belly crawling with maggots, and blood oozing from his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Some couldn't bear the sight and vomited. The stench of the corpse mixed with the smell of vomit made the whole yard unbearably suffocating. "Quick, go report this to the authorities!" someone finally shouted. The Lai village wasn't far from the county seat, about a 2-hour ride by ox cart. Thannin County's magistrate, Thihua Bin, rushed over on horseback, arriving in just half an hour. When the magistrate arrived at Li Batu's house, some people had left to cook, but the crowd hadn't dispersed. He scanned the house and asked, "Has anyone touched anything in the house?" Thihua Bin, around 40 years old, had a scholarly but commanding presence. Hearing his question, someone nervously replied, "We didn't dare go inside. Only Li Xuan Xin's wife did." "Oh, who is Li Xuan Xin's wife?" "Sir, someone said they saw Li Batu's dog biting our chicken, so I came to talk to him. When I entered the house and saw this, I was stunned. I had no strength to touch anything. Please, sir, investigate thoroughly." Li Xuan Xin's wife, usually fierce, was now trembling before the magistrate and knelt as she answered. At this moment, a guard reported that there were only a few footprints inside, confirming that Li Xuan Xin's wife's account was accurate. "Stand up, I was just asking. No need to be afraid." Thihua Bin stepped forward to help her up. "Sir, we need to wait for the coroner to confirm whether the corpse is indeed Li Batu as the villagers claim." In fact, the face of the corpse was so disfigured it was unrecognizable. The villagers identified it as Li Batu only because he was the only one who could be in this house. "Yes, let's wait for Fuangai then." Speaking of Fuangai, Thihua Bin sighed. Fuangai couldn't ride a horse and refused to share one. Every time something happened, he slowly followed on his donkey. Fortunately, his donkey, which he found who knows where, was much faster than normal donkeys. Otherwise, Waiting for him would have been incredibly frustrating for everyone. About 10 minutes later, Fuangai arrived, bowed his head, and said, "Sorry," before beginning the examination. The person who reported the incident had briefly described the condition of the body. Thihua Bin had ordered incense and white powder to be burned to neutralize the smell. Fuangai plugged his nose with sesame oil, chewed a piece of ginger, and then approached the corpse. First, Fuangai used water to clean the maggots and dirt, only starting the autopsy once the skin was clean. He said, "The victim is a male, around 30 years old, deceased for about a month. The forehead is bluish-black and not decomposed or insect-eaten, likely due to a severe but non-fatal head injury while alive. The neck shows bruising and a dislocated vertebra, with clenched fists indicating possible strangulation. The left leg has a bone deformity, possibly from an old injury, causing a slight limp." After examining the front, Fuangai signaled for someone to turn the body over. Duong Tiem Din, who was reluctantly taking notes, helped turn the body despite his disgust. Internally, he lamented the hardships of being a coroner's assistant. Not only did he have to follow the magistrate everywhere, but he was also forced to handle all sorts of tasks with corpses. He had suggested hiring more assistants for the coroner's office, but Fuangai's aversion to interacting with the living scared away the few recruits they managed to hire. What a tragic fate. Duong Tiem Din sighed with resentment. Meanwhile, Fuangai remained calm, continuing his work and speaking in a low voice. The body shows multiple red marks and clear abrasions, indicating a struggle with someone before death. After completing the examination, Fuangai ordered diluted apple cider vinegar to be poured around the body, then stood before Thihua Bin, awaiting questions. Thihua Bin only needed the autopsy results. Now that he had them, he knew the coroner's job was only to examine the body, not to make any conjectures, so there was nothing further to ask. He waved for Fuangai to step back. It was evident that Li Batu had a conflict with someone and was killed by them. The case wasn't complicated. Checking the villagers one by one would reveal the culprit. Fuangai had no interest in investigating the case. After being dismissed by Thihua Bin, he mounted his donkey and left, intending to return home. Fuangai's work style was consistent, and everyone was accustomed to it, with no objections. The corpse today was significantly decomposed, yet Fuangai had seen even more gruesome bodies before. Although the examination was a bit troublesome, it did not significantly affect the assessment. Fuangai rode his donkey slowly across the fields, pondering the recent case. However, what was the introduction about a woman with disheveled hair, resembling a ghost, rushing towards him? Life is a stage. Perform well and you succeed. Having spent several years navigating society, Duong firmly believed this truth. But when one day, she suddenly woke up from a nap in the bathtub, finding herself surrounded by people with terrified, ghost-stricken expressions, even if she had won several Oscars in her previous life, she wouldn't know what divine film techniques could save the current situation. Brushing off the dirt on her body with an innocent look, Duong genuinely had no idea what had happened. Feeling something being thrown at her, she awoke to find someone shoveling dirt over her and was stunned. How did she end up being buried alive while bathing in the bathroom? What had happened without her knowing? Staring at the person for a moment, she suddenly heard him scream, "Playing dead!" And then, with a thud, the shovel hit her head. Fortunately, it struck the wooden handle, otherwise she might have been truly dead. Given the unclear situation, Duong wisely chose to remain silent. Moreover, the people in front of her were wearing long robes, hanfu, an ancient style nonetheless. The men even had long hair. With her years of fascination with historical novels, Duong felt she might have time traveled. But judging by the looks in these people's eyes, the situation didn't seem very optimistic. Time seemed to stand still in that moment. Duong-tu remained in the pit, not daring to move, while the villagers who had buried her stood a distance away, unsure whether she was faking her death. They were too scared to approach, but too uneasy to leave. Tu? Could it be that elder sister isn't dead? A voice filled with a mix of hope and doubt broke the stalemate. Duong-tu looked at the speaker, a young man about 17 or 18, tall and simple-looking. Before Duong-tu could reply, an old woman scolded him. Seeing this, the village chief's face twitched with anger as he struck the ground with his stick. "What are you all making such a ruckus for? What relation do I have with that girl? Now that she's run off, don't you think you should catch her before she brings harm to another village?" Only then did everyone realize that her previous words were fabricated. Seeing her flee in haste, they lost some of their fear and began to give chase. Duong-tu, being a woman and having just come back to life, quickly grew short of breath. As the pursuers drew closer, she could only keep running, hoping someone would save her. Otherwise, her life would end unjustly. Just as she thought this, she saw someone riding a donkey ahead. Almost believing in divine intervention, she mustered the last of her strength to run forward. However, when she saw the person clearly, her plea for help faltered. Though he had a handsome appearance, his cold demeanor was evident. He dismounted the donkey, his brows furrowing darkly. "What's going on?" His voice wasn't angry, but it sent chills down one's spine. Duong-tu suddenly doubted if asking this person for help would be of any use, as he showed no sign of sympathy. But with no other option, she said, "Sir, please save me. They want to burn me alive." The village chief saw this man and instinctively felt he wasn't someone to be trifled with. Someone recognized him as the coroner from the county office. In this small village, whether they were high-ranking or low-ranking officials, they were people the villagers dared not offend. So they adopted a very respectful attitude. Hearing Duong-tu's plea, the village chief's eyebrows trembled, fearing the man might misunderstand, and hurriedly explained everything clearly. It was only then that Duong-tu understood her situation. Duong-tu, an orphaned girl whose father had died a month ago, was found drowned in the river that morning. When people pulled her up to prepare for burial, she suddenly resurrected, and now they were about to burn her. Such a simple and brutal reaction. Duong-tu couldn't help but think, "Are you certain she was dead when you found her? Was it suicide or murder?" Many years as a coroner allowed Phuong Ngai to quickly grasp the crucial points. Tu was a pitiful child, usually very obedient. No one would want to harm her. But since her mother died, her mental state seemed to decline. A few days ago, there was heavy rain, and the riverbank was slippery. She probably slipped and fell in. There was even a basket of laundry by the river. A neighbor lady, who often took care of Tu, spoke up. Phuong Ngai saw everyone nodding in agreement, knowing her words were true. But solving crimes wasn't Phuong Ngai's forte. He only cared about whether a person was truly dead or not. With this thought, he glanced at the silent woman standing there. Although she looked a bit pale, she was clearly healthy. Finally, everyone confirmed that when they found Duong-tu, she had indeed died, showing no signs of breathing or a pulse. At that point, she was definitely considered dead. Phuong Ngai's eyes lit up at this. He recalled reading in an ancient book about a woman from Dong Lang who had been ill for 3 months with no medicine proving effective. Suddenly, she woke up after seemingly passing away. Her family was delighted, but her personality had drastically changed. They believed she was possessed by a spirit. A passing monk explained that she was not their daughter, but a ghost inhabiting a corpse, known as a living corpse. A living corpse? What an intriguing discovery. Initially, when he saw a disheveled woman running towards him, Phuong Ngai had no intention of helping her. He was just surprised they dared to burn a woman alive in broad daylight. Now, he wanted to take her home. Fuang Ngai, a man who followed his whims, was now interested in the woman before him. He said, "Do you know that harming an innocent person is a serious crime?" The villagers had never thought about committing a crime. They were just afraid that this impure being would harm others. Hearing Fuang Ngai's words, someone retorted, "But Tutu is no longer human. We fear she will harm people if we let her go." "I understand your concern, but from what I see, she is indeed a living person. If you are not comfortable, I can take her with me and keep an eye on her." Fuang Ngai's words were reasonable, and the villagers couldn't argue against them. Moreover, even though his words were polite, his cold demeanor made it clear that this matter was not up for negotiation. Finally, the village chief sighed. "Then we will do as the young master says." He paused for a moment, seemingly mustering the last of his courage before continuing. "Regardless, Tutu can never return to Duong village." People of that era took spirits and demons very seriously. Fuang Ngai understood their fears and agreed without needing Duongtu's input. It seemed unsurprising that Fuang Ngai would suggest Duongtu ride the only small donkey available. When he did, Duongtu obediently climbed on, and Fuang Ngai led the donkey slowly ahead. Fuang Ngai was naturally quiet, and Duongtu, having just narrowly escaped death, was still in a state of shock. They traveled in silence for a while, until the golden orb in the sky was no longer visible, finally arriving at Fuang Ngai's home. Fuang Ngai's words were not mere pleasantries. He genuinely intended for Duongtu to stay by his side for observation. This peculiar living corpse intrigued him greatly, to the point where he even contemplated stripping off her clothes to thoroughly examine her after cleaning her up. However, considering that Duongtu was ultimately still a woman and alive, and he was not some sort of animal, he decided to temporarily set aside that idea. The courtyard wasn't large, and upon opening the door, the main house came into view. On the east and west sides were 2 rooms each, with one of the east rooms belonging to Fuang Ngai, and the other serving as a guest room, although visitors were rare. Today, this room belonged to Duongtu. On the west side were a storage room and a kitchen, with a small room for firewood nearby, next to a well, all looking quite tidy. After introducing everything to Duongtu, Fuang Ngai had nothing more to say. The two were not yet acquainted, and there would be plenty of time for that later. In the olden days, there weren't many entertainment activities in the evening, and Fuang Ngai had no intention of chatting all night with Duongtu. After washing up, they went back to their rooms. Duongtu thought she might have trouble sleeping in an unfamiliar place, but due to exhaustion both physically and mentally, she fell asleep as soon as she lay down. Perhaps due to biological reasons or a subconscious desire to wake up early, Duongtu woke up as soon as it was light outside. After washing her face and changing her clothes, she prepared to go to the kitchen to cook. Considering that Fuang Ngai, despite appearing cold, had quietly boiled water and prepared dinner yesterday, maybe he just didn't know how to express his emotions? Whether out of gratitude or a desire to survive here, Duongtu should try to work, rather than depend on others. Everyone hated freeloaders. When Fuang Ngai woke up and saw that Duongtu had already prepared breakfast, he didn't say anything, just frowned when he saw her still wearing yesterday's clothes. Seeing this, Duongtu thought he disliked her dirty clothes, feeling a bit embarrassed. Indeed, despite her efforts to clean them, yesterday's clothes were still not exactly clean, but she had no other clothes, so she had to endure. After eating, let's go buy some ready-made clothes, then buy some fabric to make whatever you like, Fuang Ngai said, surprising Duongtu, who thought she would be reprimanded. Seeing Duongtu's bewildered expression, Fuang Ngai thought she was a bit slow on the uptake, but upon further thought, He realized his mistake in assuming she had anything. So he added, "You're not used to this place yet. I'll go with you to show you around. We'll also buy whatever else we need." If it were the old Duongtu too, she had visited the fabric shop in town several times. But Duongtu now truly didn't know her way around, so Fuanggai's suggestion was thoughtful. Therefore, Duongtu increasingly believed that despite his outward coldness, Fuanggai was actually discreet. She wondered how Fuanggai felt upon hearing her assessment, but he only showed tolerance towards the corpse, not disdain for the living. Setting aside this beautiful misunderstanding, let's talk about the two going out together. Duongtu chose 2 sets of durable navy and dark green clothes from the ready-made clothing store, then bought some fabric. In reality, as someone who had never held a needle, Duongtu had no idea how to sew clothes. But in an era where every woman knew how to sew, learning this skill was necessary. Leaving the fabric store, Duongtu also bought a small bronze mirror and a wooden comb from a roadside vendor. Thus, their shopping for the day ended. Initially, Fuanggai saw that Duongtu didn't buy much and thought she was shy about money matters, so he didn't insist on anything else. But after Duongtu affirmed that she really didn't need anything else, he reluctantly went along with her, not knowing what she needed. Initially, Duongtu brought the fabric home with the intention of figuring out how to sew clothes herself, especially since she didn't know anyone here, and Fuanggai didn't have any friends either. Unexpectedly, in the afternoon, Kotam came to visit. Fuanggai had been orphaned since childhood, and without Kotam's care, he might not have grown up well. But from a young age, he liked to accompany his father in handling corpses. After his father passed away, he focused even more on that work. Now in his 20s, he had no intention of getting married. Kotam regarded him as her own child and worried about him a lot. But Fuanggai had no such intentions, and his job made few women dare to marry him. Even though she wasn't his birth mother, Kotam only knew how to worry. This morning, Kotam saw him taking a woman out, thinking she must be mistaken, but in the afternoon, she saw him bringing her back, having bought quite a lot of things, seeming like she would stay for a while. Kotam thought he had finally opened up and was overjoyed, so she quickly went to meet the woman. Regardless of rules, Kotam thought they should first get married. "Tulam, you have a potential wife, and you didn't introduce her to me?" Tulam was the name Fuanggai chose when he studied under his master, and close friends called him that. He understood Kotham's thoughts and care for him since childhood, so he explained, "This is an orphan I rescued from Duong village yesterday. Don't misunderstand, please." Although Kotham had known Fuanggai since childhood, she still understood his character somewhat, knowing he wasn't the type to easily help others. Now that he was helping a woman, saying it was nothing, she didn't believe him. So, after hearing this, Kotham wasn't disappointed, but warmly held Duongtu's hand and said with a bright smile, "She's indeed a pitiful woman. Whatever happened, it's in the past now, and only blessings await in the future." The sudden appearance of a stranger surprised Duongtu a bit, but the woman in front of her seemed very friendly, at least friendlier than Fuanggai. However, discretion was necessary, so Duongtu only smiled politely at Kotham's enthusiasm. Kotam didn't pay attention to Duongtu's lukewarm attitude. A bit of reservedness in a woman was good. If she was overly attentive to her, it would be suspicious. After inquiring about Duongtu's situation, Kotham was somewhat satisfied. Although she didn't have parents anymore, the woman was pure, her character wasn't bad, and she was beautiful. Kotam didn't ask for anything more from Fuanggai's wife. Just having someone like her was enough for her. Fuanggai didn't care about the two women. He only saw Duongtu's shyness and spoke up. "Have you eaten, Tom? Or should we wait for us to finish cooking together?" Ko Tam was a widow with a 10-year-old child at home, so she wouldn't stay here to eat. Moreover, she had asked all she wanted to know, so she waved her hand hastily. Dai Bao is waiting for me to cook. How can I eat here? Indeed, it was difficult for him to bring her back, to let the two develop their feelings freely. Ko Tam thought silently to herself the second half of the sentence, smiled brightly, then went home, leaving Phuong Ngai and Duong Tu facing each other. Finally, Duong Tu actively gave up her infatuated gaze to go to the kitchen to cook dinner. Phuong Ngai didn't object to Duong Tu doing housework herself. Although he accepted this solitary undead and decided to raise her, if she helped him with household chores, he would be pleased. A few days later, the two lived together quietly. Phuong Ngai seemed to truly only keep her around to fulfill her promise to the villagers, not even talking much to her. Duong Tu didn't feel anything, but over the past few days, Ko Tam often visited. Seeing Phuong Ngai's cold attitude annoyed her. If he didn't like her, he should have taken her home and looked at her again. Ko Tam didn't miss that. It was obvious what his intentions were. Phuong Ngai felt strange under Ko Tam's muddy and non-adhesive wall gaze. His attitude towards Duong Tu was somewhat ambiguous. He wanted to study her, but was afraid to approach her due to their recent acquaintance and her being a woman. Therefore, he often remained silent, but occasionally stared at Duong Tu. If there were no one from the mansion to report the progress of the case, requiring his testimony, the two would have to live together in difficulty for who knows how long. In fact, over the past few days, Duong Tu had been quite curious. She knew Phuong Ngai was a craftsman, a pharmacist, but seeing him indoors almost all the time, rarely going out, and hearing from Ko Tam that he spent most of his time reading in his room made her even more surprised. As far as she knew, pharmacists didn't seem to have that much free time. Only now, seeing someone come to call him to work, did things return to normal? For some reason, as Phuong Ngai stepped out of the door, he turned back and said to Duong Tu, who was watching him in the yard, "You come with me too." Duong Tu didn't know much about this place, but thanks to Ko Tam's guidance over the past few days, she understood a little. She also thought she needed to combine theory with practice, so she was very happy to have the opportunity to go out. Therefore, she nodded and followed Phuong Ngai without hesitation. As Duong Tu arrived, a crowd had gathered outside the county gate. Seeing people in official attire leading the two, the crowd automatically formed a path. Naturally, Phuong Ngai had to go to the court, while Duong Tu didn't know how she would be arranged. Seeing Phuong Ngai frowning, someone in the group of officials spoke wisely. "That lady can stand at the gate and wait. If the gentleman is worried, instruct the officials at the gate to look after her, and it will surely not take much time." Although Phuong Ngai was only a few years older than them, he couldn't compare to the experience and reputation they had accumulated over the years, along with the trust of their superiors. Therefore, everyone addressed him as gentleman. At this point, seeing the gentleman worried, they automatically solved the problem. Phuong Ngai also made no progress in studying Duong Tu over the past few days. When he saw her looking at him, he felt momentarily moved, so he took her along, only now realizing that this action had created an awkward situation. He grunted an agreement to the suggestion of the officials. With everyone gathered, the trial began, following the usual "Woo!" chant. Then the formal trial proceedings took place. The case was quite simple. Li Ni Dai got drunk in the town, and on the way back was cursed by Li Bitu's dog, so he threw stones at it. Li Bitu, seeing his dog being hit, cursed back, and in their drunken state, they fought, and eventually he strangled Li Bitu to death. Seeing the dead man, half drunk, he realized the seriousness of the situation, so he wiped away all traces of himself and returned home pretending to be drunk. The incident was accidental, with no prior cause or motive, so no one suspected anything. And if someone hadn't mentioned that Li Ni had been much more obedient lately, no one would have suspected, prolonging this simple case. As Judge Hoa Bin had opened the trial, witnesses and evidence were ready, and everything was clear. Phuong Ngai only needed to present the results of the autopsy. Seeing him standing upright in court, presenting himself seriously, Duong Tu couldn't help but admire the diligent and handsome man, proving that the old folks' words were not wrong. After the case was concluded, everyone dispersed. Duong Tu stood at the gate listening to people sighing, "You reap what you sow," truly pitiful, while waiting for Phuong Ngai to leave together. However, she only managed to see him and the master heading backstage before a servant came out to report, "Master, please keep the gentleman. He said she should go home first." Suddenly, Duong Tu felt those sighs also applied to her. If Phuong Ngai's house wasn't near the county and she didn't remember the way out, she probably wouldn't be able to return. It's important to praise oneself for one's intelligence. Duong Tu thought so to herself, but still thanked the servant before heading back. On the other hand, Phuong Ngai being detained by Judge Hoa Bin wasn't a big deal. It's just that he noticed Phuong Ngai looking towards the door several times during the trial, and judging from his gaze, he saw a beautiful young woman. Moreover, he heard that she was brought by him, making him even more curious. "You brought the lady at the gate?" Phuong Ngai thought the master was calling him for something important, so he was a bit confused when he heard the question and unconsciously answered, "Yes." Judge Hoa Bin wasn't usually curious, but because he had a son around Phuong Ngai's age, and his wife was very interested in the orphaned girl, he was quite concerned. Seeing his son in his 20s and still unmarried, he was worried. Thinking so, Judge Hoa Bin spoke up. "You're also at the age to start a family. My son of your age now has a child who can read elementary books. If you like that lady, you should get engaged soon, or someone else might snatch her away." Normally, he wouldn't say such things, but because his wife often nagged and babbled a few words in his ear, when he saw signs of affection from Phuong Ngai, he was afraid he would only stay with the dead and miss out on a good lady. Knowing his wife, he would probably say a few more words later. Phuong Ngai didn't react to what he said, just grunted to indicate he had heard. Judge Hoa Bin swallowed his words, regretting saying them when he thought the person might run away before expressing his regret. While he was thinking this, someone came in to report that the young lady had just brought a man along. Hearing this, Judge Hoa Bin's eyebrows twitched. Was his intuition really this accurate? Perhaps he should consider a career change to fortune-telling. Duong Tu's whole body trembled with shock. Initially, she was walking back alone when she heard someone calling "Tutu, Tutu" repeatedly. As the calls grew nearer, she finally reacted, realizing that Tutu referred to her, and she turned around to see the young man she thought had died the previous day. She remembered his name as Thiet Tru. Although they hadn't interacted much, Duong Tu still appreciated him because he was the only one who stood up for her that day. He seemed like a sincere and loyal person, making it hard for anyone to dislike him. "Is that Brother Thiet Tru? What brings you here?" Hearing Duong Tu's question, Thiet Tru scratched his head in embarrassment, flashing a sheepish smile. Nothing. Nothing at all." He still didn't believe Tutu had died, despite the village chief's insistence. He called her out of reflex, not having anything specific to say, just a natural impulse to greet her when he saw her. He also realized that his actions might seem odd, so he asked again, "Are you doing well?" Seeing the awkwardness of the man in front of her, Duong Tu felt both amused and touched. If Duong Tu hadn't died and everything had gone as normal, she would have married this gentleman, and they would probably have been very happy. But she had died, and although Duong-tu was alive, she was considered a ghost, so they couldn't be together. Thinking this, seeing his innocent smile, she replied gently, "I'm doing very well. Mr. Fuang has been very kind to me. Brother doesn't need to worry." Thiet Tru didn't know whether to feel happy or sad after hearing that. He just nodded foolishly. That's good then." Then he didn't know what else to say. The situation became awkward, so Duong-tu had to ask, "Did Brother Thiet Tru come to town for something?" "Oh, I brought some items to sell and make some money, then bought some necessities to bring back." Thiet Tru regained his composure, then asked further, "I saw you were going somewhere. Where were you planning to go?" "I just came from the county and am heading back now." "I'll walk you home. The streets are crowded and it's inconvenient for a young lady to be alone." Thiet Tru seemed foolish, but not to the extent of being stupid, so he said this to Duong-tu. Of course, Duong-tu refused to let a stranger walk her home, but faced with his firm attitude, she could only agree. The two conversed sporadically along the way. Fairly in tune, as they passed through an alley, Duong-tu caught sight of a figure lying there. Curious, she approached to get a better look, only to freeze in shock. On the ground lay the body of a naked woman, presumably dead as her legs were sprawled apart, her body covered in blood and flesh. Having lived in a peaceful society for 30 years, Duong-tu had only seen such scenes on television. Facing such a horrifying sight directly, she naturally felt terrified. Fortunately, Thiet Tru handled it better. Seeing the situation, he gently turned Duong-tu's head away, embraced her, and reassured her, "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid." Though the comforting words didn't have much effect, they at least helped Duong-tu regain some composure. She struggled out of Thiet Tru's embrace, her face pale, and said, "Let's go report it." Despite calming down, her voice still trembled. Only then did Thiet Tru realize that his earlier actions were inappropriate. Fearing that Duong-tu might misunderstand, he stammered, I was just too scared." But he didn't pay attention to her suggestion to report it. At this moment, Duong-tu was at a loss for words, but the foolish demeanor of the man in front of her somehow helped her regain some calmness. She weakly smiled. "It's okay, I understand. Let's go report it." "Okay," Thiet Tru obediently agreed, but hesitated. "But should we leave someone here to watch over it?" He knew that usually someone had to stay behind, but Duong-tu was clearly in shock, and he couldn't leave her alone. Yet if he stayed, he worried about Duong-tu going to report the incident alone. At this moment, Duong-tu also considered the issue. "Then I'll go to the county office by myself." Leaving her to face the body was clearly too much for her. "No, I can't let you go alone," Thiet Tru insisted. Or I'll go with you. No one will notice here, and the body will be fine. I can't let you go alone." Thiet Tru was determined, and at this point, he seemed unchangeable in his decision, leaving Duong-tu feeling helpless. Moreover, she was truly shaken, and having someone accompany her made her feel safer. As for the body, it would probably be okay. Duong-tu comforted herself in this way. After Thiet Tru helped Duong-tu to the county office to report the incident, the local authorities immediately took action. When Fuang Ngai saw Duong-tu holding hands with another man as they emerged from the office, the sight was quite disconcerting, to the point where he didn't immediately notice her pale face. In his thoughts, Fuang Ngai cared about Duong-tu, believing that since he had saved her, she belonged to him. Now, this situation made him suddenly realize that he had overlooked something. Namely, in the eyes of others, Duong-tu was just an ordinary girl who could become someone else's wife. The thought of her being taken away, or worse, leaving voluntarily, made Fuang Ngai's mood turn sour, and his face grew darker by the moment. He began to consider the feasibility of the proposal from the county magistrate. Duong Thiet Tru looked at the dark, wrinkled face of the senior physician in front of him and felt that this person's temperament was definitely not good. Tu's words about her living well were surely just to reassure him. He held onto Tu's sleeve tighter. Though he felt this way internally, he didn't forget the main issue at hand, recounting the incident with Tu from beginning to end. Only then did Ngai notice Tu's unfavorable complexion, feeling worried, but when he saw that the two still hadn't let go of each other's hands, he angrily remarked, "Dragging each other like this in public, what's the point?" Ngai's sudden outburst startled everyone. Tu only now realized that she was still tightly gripping Tru's hand out of fear. This action in this conservative era seemed somewhat beyond the limit, but people sympathized with her as a weak, frightened young woman and said nothing. They were just surprised that the senior physician, who usually didn't get involved in anything, was now mentioning it. This is jealousy, isn't it? But now, no one was in the mood to tease Ngai. Just after one case was resolved, another one occurred, and hearing Tu describe the body, with the culprit being such a cruel and terrifying person, there must be deep-seated resentment. Furthermore, the victim had been tortured so brutally without making a sound. Either this alley was too deserted, or people were afraid of getting involved in trouble. When Tu returned here, the scene was still the same as when she left. Even the curious crowd following them was just because they saw their group was large. Bin saw the body and immediately signaled for Ngai to inspect it, while others understood the intention of isolating the curious crowd outside. Seeing Bin examining the surroundings, occasionally bending down to observe carefully, Ngai also bowed his head to focus on examining the body in front of him, but his eyes glanced at Tu, who was still standing next to Tru, and in a low voice he said, Tu, come here and lend a hand." Completely unconcerned that Tu might be frightened. As a dependent living in someone else's house, Tu naturally had no right to speak up. Upon hearing Ngai's words, she obediently went over to his side, trying her best not to look at the tragic death of the young woman. "Can you read?" Ngai asked while conducting the examination. "No, I can't," Tu replied shortly. She didn't mention that she couldn't understand the writing here. For a girl like Tu, who grew up in the countryside, not knowing how to read was normal. In that case, just stand by and watch for now. You still have to learn these things anyway, Ngai said, seemingly anticipating this situation. His expression remained calm as he nodded towards Din standing next to Bin, bothering Brother Din again. This time, Din didn't complain. Hearing Ngai's intention to use this girl as an assistant, he finally felt relieved. However, seeing that the girl couldn't even bear to look at the corpse, he couldn't help but sigh. This kid really didn't know how to appreciate good things. Bin also observed Ngai examining the scene, and upon hearing his remark, his eyebrows furrowed. Really? Not afraid of scaring people away? Everyone had their own thoughts, but only Ngai, who stirred up waves, remained calm as usual, his hands still moving steadily. The victim, female, about 20 years old, died approximately 2 hours ago. There are many bruises on her body, possibly caused by rope bindings, 16 bruises, 5 minor scratches, dating back about 15 days, but not life-threatening. The hand paused at the lower half of the victim's body for a moment before continuing. Excessive bleeding led to death, with no signs of male fluids in the body, no signs of sexual assault. The fatal wound may have been caused by a foreign object, with the possibility of injuries from blunt objects and sharp weapons. After Ngai announced the results of the autopsy, everyone took a sharp intake of breath. This method was truly cruel, torturing the young woman to death. One could only imagine the extent of the resentment it evoked. Moreover, being tortured so brutally without making a sound? At that moment, Among the curious crowd isolated outside, someone said, "Isn't this Miss Vuong Thuan Duck, who sells tofu pudding on West Street?" Actually, people were standing quite far away, making it difficult to see the body clearly. But when someone said that, everyone looked closely and saw the resemblance. Yes, that's right. It looks exactly like her. I'm sure it's Miss Vuong Thuan Duck. With the murmurs spreading through the crowd, Thi Hua Bin immediately dispatched someone to find Vuong Thuan Duck on West Street for identification of the body. When Vuong Thuan Duck was brought over, she recognized her mistress at a glance, her face pale and her knees weak as she knelt down. "Your Excellency, it is indeed my mistress. Yesterday, she mentioned visiting her birth mother and then rented a carriage to leave the city, but I never imagined. Please, Your Excellency, judge fairly for us." Her voice was filled with anguish, but Duong-tu couldn't tell if it was her hallucination or not. She seemed to perceive something unusual in his eyes. To confirm her speculation, she could only ask Phuong Ngai, who was standing nearby. Although not interested in investigating the case, Phuong Ngai couldn't leave at this moment. He could only watch Vuong Thuan Duck speak to Thi Hua Bin, naturally not missing the unusual look in her eyes. It wasn't a look of pain, but rather one of relief, as if she had been freed from something. Duong-tu also noticed, and she believed Thi Hua Bin, who had observed for many years, wouldn't miss it either. So she whispered to Duong-tu, "Don't speak carelessly." Then he returned to his usual silent observation. A warm breeze blew past her ear, tickling it. Duong-tu couldn't help but blush, feeling her body too sensitive. She marveled at how sensitive her body was, truly feeling terrible. "Oh, so for 3 days, your mistress hasn't been at home. Didn't you find it strange?" Thi Hua Bin, oblivious to the interaction between Phuong Ngai and Duong-tu, patiently asked the person in front of him. "This? Every time my mistress visits her birth mother, she stays for a few days, so I didn't find anything unusual." Vuong Thuan Duck's expression was hesitant, but her words didn't sound deceitful. Thi Hua Bin could only continue to inquire, "Was there anything unusual before she left home?" "Your Excellency, everything was normal. My mistress was always gentle and never held grudges against anyone. Today..." Vuong Thuan Duck burst into tears after speaking. Though Thi Hua Bin didn't approve of a grown man crying like this in front of a crowd, thinking of the lost mistress, he sighed and comforted. "I will definitely clarify the matter and bring justice to your mistress. You may go back now. Your mistress's body needs to be brought to the mansion for investigation. Once the truth is revealed, justice will be served to you." Unexpectedly, the district magistrate was so kind to her. Vuong Thuan Duck naturally didn't dare to argue and quickly nodded in gratitude before retreating. Once Vuong Thuan Duck's figure disappeared, Duong Tiam Din asked Thi Hua Bin with a puzzled expression, "Clearly, there's something wrong with Vuong Thuan Duck. Why did you let her go?" When summoned, the genuine surprise and anguish in Vuong Thuan Duck's demeanor indicated that he didn't kill the mistress. However, there seems to be something he's hiding based on his demeanor. Despite pressing for answers, no results were obtained, so it's best to release him for now and see how things unfold later. Thi Hua Bin didn't conceal his thoughts from his subordinates, explaining his thought process step by step. Effective investigation only happened with agreement between superiors and subordinates. Seeing Duong Tiam Din understanding, Thi Hua Bin ordered the body to be taken to Phuong Ngai's workplace and then sent someone to investigate at the victim's birth and marital homes. Everyone then returned to the mansion. Entering the autopsy room with Phuong Ngai, Thi Hua Bin asked solemnly, "The victim's body suffered a tragic death, yet no one around heard or knew anything, indicating there was no struggle. I suspect the victim was drugged before death. Can you check?" Sharing Thi Hua Bin's speculation, Phuong Ngai also had a similar feeling. "If it's poison, I would have detected it during the initial examination. Now it could be a sedative, which is not poisonous. To check, we would need to perform a surgical autopsy. This? DUYEN hesitated. Performing a casual autopsy on the body was a significant matter and required family consent. Moreover, the body, born of parents, shouldn't be damaged. Few people accepted this. DUYEN found himself in a difficult situation. Standing nearby, Duong-tu observed the discussion about whether to perform an autopsy on the body, perhaps to detect poisoning. Despite still feeling shocked compared to when she first saw the body, she was surprisingly calmer now, maybe overwhelmed by the excitement and became numb. As for Duong Tiet-tru, he had no business inside the mansion, especially as it was getting dark, and he needed to return to town. Duong Tiet-tru's departure significantly improved Phuong Ngai's mood, to the point where he didn't express any annoyance when faced with DUYEN's hesitation. DUYEN knew Phuong Ngai had an unusual obsession with the body. If there were suspicions, the body must be dissected. He could only say that he would try to convince the victim's family when they arrived the next day. He instructed Phuong Ngai to take Duong-tu home to rest first. Since there was no reason to stay, Phuong Ngai didn't object when Duong-tu pulled her out. By the time they reached the courtyard, Duong-tu still hadn't resisted, and the gloomy expression on Phuong Ngai's face had finally disappeared. Knowing that Duong-tu was genuinely shocked today, he stopped her from going to the kitchen and went in himself to prepare for her to rest. Initially, Duong-tu thought Phuong Ngai was someone who didn't show emotions easily. But after today's events, she felt he was truly indifferent. When he forced her to stand next to the body, she wanted to shake his shoulders and say, "You're too indifferent, too cold, too irrational." But now he was being considerate like this. Was he joking? Men's hearts? Like the bottom of the ocean. When Duong-tu couldn't figure it out, Phuong Ngai quickly brought out 2 bowls of porridge and some side dishes. "I guess you're not in the mood for eating right now, so I made porridge." The tone was casual, the expression ordinary, but the action was overly warm. "Devil!" Duong-tu suspiciously glanced at him twice. "Why's that?" Phuong Ngai sat down at the table, showing an appropriate level of confusion under her probing gaze. "Oh, nothing." Duong-tu quickly lowered her head to show obedience, fearing he would ask further, and added, "Are you going to eat too?" He brought out 2 bowls of porridge, obviously not just for himself. With such an obvious question, Phuong Ngai clearly had no patience to answer, just nodded and remained silent. At this point, Duong-tu didn't dare to speak up, just silently held the spoon to eat the porridge. Throughout the meal, she only managed to take a few spoonfuls, eating very little. Seeing Duong-tu's distracted look, Phuong Ngai suddenly spoke as if absent-mindedly. "Is that man close to you?" Phuong Ngai's sudden question startled Duong-tu, and it took her a while to understand who he was referring to. "Are you talking about Brother Tiet-tru?" "Brother Tiet-tru?" Phuong Ngai's tone was slightly elevated, showing his dissatisfaction with Duong-tu's familiar way of addressing him. Duong-tu was used to calling Duong-tu Su by his name, so she didn't notice Phuong Ngai's attitude, just nodded and said, "Yes, he's from the same hometown as me. You may have met him the day you saved me, but you may not remember." "Uh-huh." Phuong Ngai signaled for her to continue. "Brother Tiet-tru has always been good to me. When my father was alive, he arranged a marriage between me and his family. If it weren't for, after my father's funeral, we would have been married." Now, Duong-tu had to thank the gossiping women a lot. If they hadn't chatted about the great deeds of Duong-tu Su's ancestors that day, she wouldn't have known so much. "Oh, so you still want to marry him?" This was the point Phuong Ngai cared about. The rest could be temporarily ignored. How could that be possible? The village head already told me not to go back to Duong village that day. Even if Brother Tiet-tru moved out for me, his mother wouldn't agree. Duong-tu laughed bitterly. If it weren't for Fuang-ai's rescue, she would have nowhere to go. Those time-traveling heroines were entirely unrealistic. In this world, she didn't even have basic survival skills. What about marrying me then? This statement was unexpected, especially since they had only known each other for a few days. Duong-tu was furious and fell silent for a moment. Fuang-ai seemed unaware that his words were too much and continued. I'm over 20 years old now. It's time to start a family. You're old enough to get married too. It's very suitable. I'll respect you as a noblewoman and never think of taking concubines. If you agree, I'll talk to Madame Ko tomorrow and ask her to prepare. Duong-tu was just momentarily surprised, but she heard every word Fuang-ai said clearly. Honestly, she was quite moved. She wasn't a romantic in love. Since coming here, she knew she wanted to be self-reliant, at least for now. Initially, she decided to cling to this man until she could stand on her own. Although he didn't seem particularly gentle or wealthy, his words, no concubines, respect for her, truly touched her. In this feudal society, even if she was an orphaned woman, it was hard to remain single for life. Right now, the man in front of her could really be a good support. Thinking it over, Duong-tu felt she had no reason to refuse, but I'm in the mourning period for my father. I can't get married now. Fuang-ai made the proposal bluntly, but there was still a hint of thoughtfulness in his heart. He said, "It's okay. You can still get married during the mourning period. Your father has been gone for less than 100 days. We can get married now." Duong-tu had also heard of the custom of marrying during mourning, but it was usually when there was an unavoidable reason, not like them, without any reason, just getting married on a whim. Fuang-ai noticed Duong-tu's suspicion and added, "I'm not forcing you. It's just that the mourning period lasts for 3 years. I'm already 26 now. Waiting for 3 more years. At this age, I could have grandchildren. I can't delay anymore. If we marry early, you can take my surname sooner, and many things will be easier," Fuang-ai said. Duong-tu didn't understand why Fuang-ai seemed to decide to marry her. If he was in a hurry to get married, he could have chosen someone else. Just as she didn't understand why he had no intention of saving her that day. But in the end, not only did he save her, but also brought her back. She didn't believe it was out of Fuang-ai's kindness. But thinking back, she was just an orphaned girl with nothing worth plotting against. Thinking so, Duong-tu stopped thinking and nodded in agreement. It seemed like Fuang-ai had predicted that Duong-tu would agree. He didn't seem happy, just saying, "Okay, after we finish here, I'll talk to Madame Ko, ask her what she needs to prepare." Saying that, he cleaned up the dishes and went straight to the door. While the two were arranging their lives while having dinner, Duong-tu, beyond her initial surprise, reacted calmly. Despite Fuang-ai's "this is just a small matter" expression, she couldn't feel anything about the upcoming marriage event. By the time the moon rose above the willow, Duong-tu had fallen into a deep sleep. But during the day, despite trying to keep calm, the gruesome scene was still terrifying to her. She slept restlessly, dreaming of blood pouring towards her, the corpse with open eyes laughing at her. Duong-tu woke up in a cold sweat. Moonlight streamed through the window. Outside was so quiet that no wind could be heard. Duong-tu held the blanket tightly, feeling her heart pounding. Even with her eyes closed at midnight, she couldn't sleep. The image of the corpse kept appearing before her eyes, making her feel like she was going crazy, even wanting to run to Fuang-ai's room to sleep together. When Fuang-ai knocked on the door in the morning, she only then realized that she had slept at some point during the night. Duong-tu hastily changed clothes, without time for makeup, and rushed out to open the door. The woman's pale face and dark circles around her eyes were clearly due to lack of sleep. Fuang-ai thought for a moment before saying, Don't worry about the marriage. I won't let you down. He thought all women cared about this lifelong matter, and last night she must have been worried about it. Now he realized how sudden it had been. Although she didn't look in the mirror, Duangtu knew her appearance was quite terrible. She didn't understand why Phuong Ngai brought this up. She just forced a smile and asked, "Have you had breakfast? If not, I'll cook for you. You're about to go to the mansion." Phuong Ngai waved his hand. "No need. You wash your face, and later we'll eat on the way." On the way? Duangtu felt like she had missed something. "Yes, you'll come to the mansion with me. After Mr. Thi finishes talking to the victim's relatives, we'll proceed with the autopsy." Phuong Ngai's natural expression made Duangtu suspect that they had discussed this and agreed upon it earlier, but she couldn't recall any such conversation between them. So she could only say, "Why ask me to come along? I know nothing about handling corpses." Phuong Ngai replied without hesitation, "You are my fiancé, and sooner or later you must get used to these things. Besides, I'm not comfortable asking others for help with certain matters." "But do you really think it's reasonable to force a weak woman like me to spend the whole day dealing with a corpse?" Duangtu wanted to say, but Phuong Ngai cut her off. "Enough. Wash your face first. We'll discuss the rest later." It was clear he wasn't patient with her hesitant attitude. Duangtu had no chance to object and just washed her face quickly before reluctantly following Phuong Ngai out the door. The sun was already high, and there were only a few people left in the breakfast shop. Duangtu had no sense of time since she arrived here and only now realized she had slept in late. No wonder Phuong Ngai called her. The shop owner seemed familiar with Phuong Ngai, jokingly saying, "Hey, who's this beauty? So beautiful. Remember to invite us to your wedding." "Sure, I will," Phuong Ngai replied seriously. The shop owner was used to his cold demeanor, but was surprised to see him suddenly admit it so openly. He chuckled, "Wow, that was kept secret. Didn't expect you to find a beauty so suddenly." Phuong Ngai paid no attention to the owner's words, focusing on his own porridge. The shop owner didn't expect him to respond, and after speaking, turned to serve other customers. Meanwhile, hearing Phuong Ngai's serious reply, Duangtu's face turned red uncontrollably. It wasn't until they arrived at the mansion that her temperature finally cooled down. The deceased's parents and spouse were waiting at the gate. When Duangtu arrived, Thi Hua Bin was discussing with them about conducting the autopsy. The three of them adamantly disagreed, with the elderly father even crying out, "What injustice is this? My daughter is dead, and you won't even leave a complete corpse for her." "Old sir, please listen to me," Thi Hua Bin reluctantly advised beside them. But the elderly woman didn't pay attention and continued crying, "My poor daughter." Seeing Phuong Ngai's face growing darker and darker, Duangtu was genuinely afraid he might rush forward and silence the old lady. After all, she had just experienced the pain of losing her daughter, and now being told that the body needed to be dissected was understandably overwhelming. Duangtu wanted to calm Phuong Ngai down, but she felt helpless. Instead, she turned her attention to the grieving family members, especially the elderly woman who was crying so mournfully. Suddenly, Duangtu remembered a saying she had heard somewhere and decided to use it to comfort them. "Respected elders, I understand your immense sorrow, and my heart aches for your loss. However, please consider this. Conducting the autopsy is not meant to disrespect your daughter, but to seek justice for her. Only by understanding the cause of her death can we ensure that such a tragedy does not befall another innocent soul. Your daughter's suffering will not be in vain if it helps protect others." She hoped that by appealing to their sense of justice and the possibility of preventing future tragedies, she could ease their pain and gain their consent for the autopsy. "Respected elder, we do not mean to disrespect the deceased. We merely wish to let the deceased speak, to reconstruct the journey to the afterlife and uncover the truth about your daughter. Bringing the culprit to justice will restore the deceased's dignity in the end. Seeing the elderly woman stop crying and noticing the enlightened looks in the eyes of the other family members, Duangtu continued, "Your daughter may have passed, but that doesn't mean she has lost the power to reveal the culprit. Her body is our best evidence. Every wound on her tells us what she went through. By refusing to allow us to perform a further examination, you are preventing your daughter from voicing her grievances, and you are aiding the culprit." Duangtu's words seemed to resonate deeply with the grieving family. The elderly woman's tears slowed, and she began to listen more attentively. The other family members, too, seemed more inclined to consider the request seriously, understanding the importance of seeking justice for their lost loved one. Having spoken to this extent, Duangtu found herself at a loss for further words. However, it seemed the family of the deceased had begun to understand. The old man stepped forward to console the elderly woman, saying, "Mother, this young lady is right. Our daughter is gone. Let them investigate as they need to. We cannot allow the one who killed our daughter to roam free outside the bounds of justice. My mother-in-law, father-in-law is right. Let the authorities conduct their examination," added Vuong Tuan Duc, stepping forward to persuade as well. Despite his hatred for his wife, they had been married for several years. He, too, wanted to know who had killed his wife, to confirm a vague suspicion he harbored. The elderly woman, who had just calmed down, became enraged again upon hearing Vuong Tuan Duc's voice. Her eyes turned red as she pointed at him, shouting, "It was you! It must have been you who killed Huang Ni. You deserve 1,000 cuts." She then tried to attack Vuong Tuan Duc. Her husband quickly pulled her back, saying, "Old lady, how can you accuse him like this? Tuan Duc is Huang Ni's husband. How could he possibly kill her?" The elderly lady paid no heed to her husband's words, instead suddenly kneeling down to plead with Thi Hua Bin. "Please, sir, administer justice for the people. It must be Vuong Tuan Duc who killed my daughter. I am absolutely sure it was him." This statement shocked everyone present, but thinking back to Vuong Tuan Duc's peculiar demeanor the day before, Thi Hua Bin remained composed. He gently lifted the elderly woman up and said in a soothing tone, "Sir, please calm down. If you have anything to say, please stand up and speak slowly." Perhaps Thi Hua Bin's friendly attitude helped to calm the elderly woman down. However, she remained kneeling on the ground, refusing to stand up. My poor daughter. At the beginning of last year, when she returned home to visit relatives, she was harassed by the son of the carpenter in the village, who thought highly of himself. He used his position to pressure her, and every time Huang Ni returned home, he would coerce her into obeying him. Huang Ni was weak and afraid to tell anyone, and the result? The elderly woman burst into tears after speaking, then glared at Vuong Tuan Duc with eyes full of hatred. It must be him who knew about this and couldn't bear it, so he killed Huang Ni, my unfortunate daughter. She did nothing wrong. Last time she came home, she even told me that Tuan Duc treated her more and more coldly, scolding and beating her. Listening to the lady recount everything, Vuong Tuan Duc closed his eyes in agony, kneeling down to accept his fate. "Please, sir, judge wisely. I truly discovered my wife's infidelity. It's true that I harbored some resentment in my heart, which affected my attitude towards her. But to kill someone, how could I do such a thing? Moreover, these past few days, I've been buying tofu in the Western market. Everyone can attest to that. I beg you to judge fairly. You found a clue. Why didn't you seek justice for your wife?" Faced with Thi Hua Bin's question, Vuong Tuan Duc responded dryly, How could I speak up about such a shameful matter? The son of the carpenter was known for his violent tendencies, and even ordinary people dared not provoke him. In this situation, revealing such a disgraceful incident would not only disgrace himself, but also leave him helpless. So, he resorted to using his power over his wife. Honestly, when he saw Huang Ni's body, he felt a sense of relief. Dongtu didn't know how to respond to such a weak man. Just a glimpse of his demeanor made her feel a surge of anger towards her deceased wife, especially knowing that even after her death, he still hid important information to obstruct the investigation. Truly, she couldn't help but look at the man beside her, her lips forming a straight line, filled with disdain for the words of the man in front of her. She thought, Fuang Ngai would never be like this. Fuang Ngai paid no attention to Dongtu's glance. Instead, he spoke impatiently. Do you want to examine the body or not? Thi Huabin's eyebrows furrowed at Fuang Ngai's rude behavior, seemingly displeased. However, knowing his personality, he wasn't sure what to say at the moment. Among the three kneeling on the ground, one still hadn't recovered. Another was a confirmed suspect who couldn't easily speak, and the elderly man, after a moment of overwhelming grief, regained his composure first. He wiped away the tears that had unknowingly fallen and respectfully kowtowed to Fuang Ngai, saying, You can examine the body however you need, but please, sir, seek justice for my daughter. Seeing that the victim's family agreed, Fuang Ngai looked at Thi Huabin and asked with his eyes, Can we proceed with the examination now? Thi Huabin nodded in agreement, then helplessly began to console the elderly couple in front of him. Please, stand up. There's no need to keep kneeling. We will definitely get to the bottom of this case. Meanwhile, Dongtu obediently followed Fuang Ngai to the examination room, where the body had been stored since the previous day, kept on ice. As she entered, she felt a chilling air hit her. Watching Fuang Ngai take up a knife to begin the autopsy, Dongtu felt a shiver run down her spine. Remembering her nightmare from the previous night, the moment Fuang Ngai made his first incision, she fainted with a loud thud. Duong Tiam Din, who was there to assist, was at a loss and could only ask Fuang Ngai, What should we do now? Fuang Ngai looked at Dongtu lying on the ground with a look of disdain and said, Move her to the next room first. Don't let her get in the way here. The adjacent room, usually used for receiving guests, had no bed, only chairs. So Dongtu was placed on one of the chairs. What a terrible attitude. When this young lady wakes up, someone must warn her not to be deceived by his fair appearance? Duong Tiam Din muttered to himself as he carried Dongtu to the next room. Unexpectedly, Fuang Ngai put down the knife, looking regretful, and walked towards him. All right, let me handle this, he said as he picked up the person and carried her aside. While walking, he muttered, What a hassle. Duong Tiam Din could only show a perplexed expression, thinking, could it be that this guy finally has a change of heart? Although the likelihood was slim, it was a bit of a positive sign. When Fuang Ngai entered the room, he saw Duong Tiam Din's ambiguous expression directed at him. Ignoring it, he picked up the knife and continued his task. By the time Dongtu regained consciousness, everything had already concluded. She looked around in a daze, and once she realized where she was, she understood that she had fainted and had been laid on a makeshift bed of chairs. She sat up, rubbed her numb legs, and decided to go outside to check on the progress. As expected, the deceased had been drugged, not with anesthetics or ointments as everyone thought, but with an aphrodisiac, a potent one at that, which pointed suspicion towards the carpenter's son. However, when he was brought in, he claimed to know nothing about Huang Ni. Moreover, according to his father, he had been confined to the house due to some recent trouble, and the neighbors could all vouch for this. This led the investigation to a dead end, leaving everyone deep in thought. However, Fuang Ngai was not among them. By the time Dongtu reached the courtyard, he had finished reporting the autopsy results and was preparing to leave. Whether or not this case was solved didn't concern him. He didn't care about the complexity of the matter. Now that his part was done, he had no intention of staying any longer. Faced with Phuong Ngai's high-handed nonchalance, Duong Tu could only silently express her mixture of disdain and admiration. She then obediently followed behind him. Internally, she lamented her shattered future prospects. As they walked together back to their quarters, Phuong Ngai suddenly remarked, "How useless." For a moment, Duong Tu was taken aback. When she realized what he had said, she glared at him fiercely before slamming the door behind her. She was an ordinary woman, at most accustomed to killing chickens. Expecting her to witness him dissecting a human body without flinching was unreasonable. Did he expect her to remain calm and composed throughout? Sorry, she didn't have that kind of fortitude. After sighing for a while, Duong Tu realized she had been rambling too much. Truly, idle hands are the devil's workshop. She composed herself, noting that it was getting late, and decided to continue her daily task, cooking dinner. When she entered the kitchen, she found Phuong Ngai already there. Feeling a bit embarrassed about her earlier state, she took the washed vegetables from his hands and softly said, "Let me do it. You go back to your room and wait for a while." Phuong Ngai hadn't intended any harm with his earlier remark. He had said it thoughtlessly and regretted it as soon as he saw Duong Tu's reaction. Now, seeing her act as if nothing had happened, his regret turned into an inexplicable discomfort. Unable to understand this feeling, he stood at the kitchen door, not moving. Duong Tu cooked with practiced ease, making even a simple plate of stir-fried vegetables taste special. Phuong Ngai knew it was just an illusion since he had tasted her cooking before, and while it was quite good, it wasn't extraordinary. Yet, at this moment, he felt himself almost drooling, unable to understand why he was having this illusion. So, he closed his eyes and tried to think it through. By the time Duong Tu had finished and brought all the food to the table, Phuong Ngai still couldn't figure out the reason. The meal was simple: a plate of stir-fried greens, some braised chicken wings, stir-fried eggplant, and a large bowl of soup. When Duong Tu invited him to eat, Phuong Ngai decided to stop thinking about it because clearly she was his. After eating, Phuong Ngai decided to visit Madame Ko to discuss their marriage. The news made Madame Ko very happy. She said, "Oh, this is not just any event. I'll help you organize a perfect wedding. The traditional steps of marriage, proposal, betrothal gifts, engagement, and so on, were simplified since Duong Tu lived with Phuong Ngai and had no elders to represent her family." Despite this, Madame Ko remained very busy and happy, finding no trouble in the preparations. Madame Ko quickly set the wedding date for the 28th of the month. Although today was only the 12th, which seemed a bit rushed, it was enough time to prepare. Initially, Duong Tu planned to embroider her own wedding dress. However, after Madame Ko saw that she had only managed to make a simple vest, she decided to have the dress made at a shop, leaving Duong Tu to embroider just a few small money bags. In the end, the wedding dress was bought from a store. Duong Tu initially worried that her inability to sew would make Madame Ko suspicious, but she soon realized that Madame Ko didn't mind at all, which made her feel relieved. In fact, even if Madame Ko had doubts, she figured it was understandable. Duong Tu had been raised by her father alone, living with a man in the house, so it was natural she wasn't skilled in domestic crafts. Moreover, with the wedding approaching, Madame Ko was so happy she didn't have time to overthink things. With the wedding date set, they naturally needed to send out invitations to friends and relatives, but the two of them had no family, only the colleagues at the yamen. Phuong Ngai, a handsome young man, was about to marry the gentle Duong Tu, making them a perfect match. However, everyone knew that Phuong Ngai often neglected her and even took her to see corpses, making them feel sorry for Duong Tu. They thought she must have been deceived by Phuong Ngai, but still, they said they would attend the wedding. When Thi Hua Bin heard the news, unlike the others, he didn't think deceitfully. He knew that even a case wouldn't delay the wedding. "I will witness your wedding," Thi Hua Bin said, laughing heartily as he stroked his beard. Just after he spoke, this young man had already started preparing, not as fast as he was with other matters. Phuong Ngai had never thought about who would witness his wedding, but since Magistrate Thi had offered, he wouldn't refuse. "Thank you, Your Honor, for your consideration." Phuong Ngai bowed to show his gratitude. "It's nothing, just want to add some joy. My wife might want to do your bride's makeup, making her a truly blessed lady." Thi Hua Bin wasn't joking. His wife often reminded him that when Phuong Ngai got married, she wanted to do the bride's makeup. She had missed attending their son's wedding and wanted to make up for that regret. Hearing this, Phuong Ngai expressed his thanks. "Your wife is very kind. I thank you on behalf of Tutu." All right. Why so formal all of a sudden?" After listening to Thi Hua Bin, Phuong Ngai replied, "Yes, thank you," then added, "Marriage arrangements are quite complicated. I'll take my leave first." Thi Hua Bin couldn't hide his happiness, laughing as he said, Go on. Phuong Ngai didn't notice Thi Hua Bin's mood. After finishing his work, he decided to return home. When he got home, Duong Tu was embroidering a money pouch in her room. 5 days had passed since they decided to get married. During these days, they had reverted to a respectful attitude towards each other, similar to when they first met, though not very intimate. Now, one was busy with the money pouches, while the other was busy preparing for the wedding. This was quite normal since couples about to marry typically don't see each other, yet they were living under the same roof. Nevertheless, both felt a bit uneasy. Fortunately, the 28th was approaching. On that day, the bright sunlight streamed through the window, filling the house with a festive atmosphere. Duong Tu had been taken to Madame Ko's place the day before because it wasn't appropriate for her to stay in the same house before the wedding. Makeup and more makeup. By the time the sun was setting in the west, Phuong Ngai rode his donkey, parading through the city with flutes and drums, heading to Madame Ko's house. After some challenges, Duong Tu was placed into the bridal sedan chair by Phuong Ngai. She was carried around the city in the sedan chair before returning to Phuong Ngai's house for the ceremony. Typically, weddings were held near the home and paraded around the city. And Phuong Ngai followed this tradition, only he rode a donkey instead of a horse, attracting quite a few curious glances. Duong Tu sat in the sedan chair, her eyes covered by the bridal veil, unaware of what was happening outside. After the wedding ceremony, she was led into the bridal chamber. Phuong Ngai, after escorting Duong Tu to the bridal chamber, went outside to toast with the guests. Duong Tu sat quietly on the bed, waiting for Phuong Ngai's return. The bed was adorned with peanuts, longans, lotus seeds, and cashews. Finding no one around, Duong Tu cleaned up the items and sat back down. Waiting time always feels endless. Duong Tu looked down at the red embroidered shoes on her feet, finally feeling the nervousness of a bride. This was her first time marrying in 2 lifetimes, and she hadn't expected to marry someone she had only known for a little over a month. However, thinking back on the past life events and considering Phuong Ngai's serious and respectful attitude, she couldn't help but smile with relief. After all, married life is what each person makes of it, and she felt fairly fortunate in her current circumstances. There weren't many guests in the courtyard, only about 3 tables of relatives and friends. Phuong Ngai went to each table, toasting with the guests, fulfilling his social duties. When Phuong Ngai opened the door and entered, he saw Duong Tu with her head bowed, her face covered by the bridal veil. Phuong Ngai stepped forward, took the bridal stick from the bridal matron, and lifted the veil. Duangtu's face was heavily made up with white powder combined with bright red lipstick. Not very beautiful, but Phuong Ngai felt a sense of peace because finally she was entirely his. The bridal matron, standing nearby, observed the two of them looking at each other and chuckled. She then handed them a bowl of dumplings, encouraging Duangtu to take a bite before asking, "Are you planning to have children?" Duangtu, feeling truly embarrassed, softly replied, "Yes." Hearing this, the bridal matron was even more delighted, and even Phuong Ngai had to smile softly. Phuong Ngai rarely smiled, at least not since Duangtu had been living with him. Hearing Phuong Ngai's laughter now, Duangtu was surprised and looked up at him in astonishment. When Duangtu looked at Phuong Ngai like that, Phuong Ngai also felt somewhat embarrassed. He gently bit his lip and said to her, "We should drink the ritual wine carefully." After they both drank the ritual wine together, the bridal matron left the room, leaving Phuong Ngai and Duangtu alone. Both knew what events would follow, making their hearts race with anticipation. Duangtu wanted to blow out the candle, but Phuong Ngai had other intentions. He said, "We should let this dragon and phoenix candle burn until it goes out on its own." Duangtu didn't quite understand his reasoning, but after hearing him, she had no choice but to agree. As they each removed their robes, every movement seemed to be an ordeal. When they were both devoid of garments, Duangtu, hailing from a peasant family, had a complexion that was not particularly fair or smooth. The crimson yolk against her pale skin became incredibly alluring. They were now entwined with each other, something he had longed for. It was only in this moment that he could observe her body, studying every part of it, guided by his hands on her form. He had forgotten his initial aspirations and only wanted to pursue what he desired in his heart. That night, Duangtu couldn't sleep well. Her body ached, and a lingering sense of unease had been haunting her for days, making her feel oppressed even in her dreams. Eventually, she was awakened by the increasingly loud knocking on the door. Opening her eyes, she found herself lying in Phuong Ngai's arms, clutching onto his waist tightly, while he silently watched her, his dark eyes clearly reflecting her image. Startled, she quickly let go, rolling deeper into the bed. Ever since being forced to live with the corpse for a long time, she had become fearful of the darkness, always unconsciously anxious when sleeping alone at night. But she never expected that the first time she slept with a man, she would display such enthusiasm, even though that man was her husband. From start to finish, Phuong Ngai showed no dissatisfaction with her actions. Except for examining the body, he always seemed emotionally detached. Calmly, he set aside the blanket, got out of bed, got dressed, then turned to look at her, signaling for her to quickly tidy up and leave. He wanted to go out and deal with whoever lacked respect and had come to cause trouble. Once Duangtu finished tidying up and stepped outside, the person with the shaved head had already explained everything. He seemed somewhat aggrieved as well. Who would have thought that this case would happen on someone else's wedding day? Wasn't this just asking for trouble? Since the discovery of the female corpse, it had been over half a month, but the case had made no progress. All leads had been cut off. But now, another female body appeared at the same location, under the same circumstances of death. This made people marvel at the case's new developments, but also heightened tensions because it showed that the previous event was not random. The murderer was still at large, and if they didn't find him soon, more people could be harmed. Upon hearing this, Duangtu became serious. She looked at Phuong Ngai's expression and knew that he would surely take her along this time. She didn't understand how she could glean so much information from his almost motionless face. Since it was still early, when Phuong Ngai led them to the crime scene, only Ti Huabing was there with his subordinates, and someone who was probably the one who discovered the body. Initially, this was a dead-end alley, deserted and unnoticed. But since the previous incident, passersby would unconsciously glance over there, allowing the body to be discovered as soon as it appeared. Feng Ai moved forward to carefully examine every part of the body. The cause of death was almost identical to the previous one, except for fewer bruises on the body. After letting Dung Timpding record the autopsy results, he turned to see Dung Tu standing next to him in a daze. Furrowing his brows, he realized that he seemed to have forgotten something, forgotten to teach her how to read. He felt that he had been neglectful towards Dung Tu, and this realization made him slightly uneasy. Li Huabin stood beside them, and she had surely heard what he said, so there was no need for him to repeat himself. Overall, it seems that the victim's cause of death resembles that of the previous victim. Whether she was drugged before her death needs further investigation. Regarding how to investigate further, no words were necessary. After Feng Ai finished speaking, he didn't make any more moves. Yeah, I know. Thi Huabin rubbed her sore head from last night's drinking. This small town had always been peaceful, but now such a terrible case had occurred, causing panic among the people. They must catch the murderer for sure. The identity of the victim had been thoroughly investigated. She was Mrs. Liu, residing in a small alley, with no apparent connection to the previous victim. However, Mrs. Liu's reputation wasn't great. She seemed indiscreet and had relationships with many men. Still, the front doors of such women often attracted trouble, and there were plenty of infamous women like her, some true, some false. However, Mrs. Liu's reputation seemed genuine. Indeed, some had seen her with multiple men. The previous victim was a virtuous lady, while this one had a bad reputation. In the case where the two had nothing in common, this subtle point caught everyone's attention. But who would continuously kill for this? As the atmosphere grew quieter, Dung Tu couldn't help but feel tense alongside everyone else. However, once Feng Ai determined his task was complete, he promptly withdrew, and it wasn't surprising that he took Dung Tu along. Following Feng Ai out of the yamen, Dung Tu pondered, "Is it really okay for Feng Ai to be a judicial officer like this?" Feng Ai seemed to see through her small thoughts. He turned back, looked down at her, and said, "I've fulfilled my duty. Staying there would just be a waste of time." His black eyes met hers as he continued, "As for you, I didn't care about raising you initially, but now I need you to be useful. You must listen to me." The direct words made Dung Tu immediately understand his intention. He initially wanted to raise her, for reasons unknown, but now he wanted her to be his assistant, still unclear about the reason. She just needed to obey, not to think recklessly or oppose his wishes. Honestly speaking, this wasn't difficult, except facing the corpse, which could make one lose appetite and sleep. However, Feng Ai's actions so far had shown that he treated her well. Dung Tu couldn't deny this. Seeing the girl before him understood his meaning, Feng Ai withdrew his gaze, coldly saying, "First, you must learn to read and write." "Okay." Suddenly, feeling illiterate after over 10 years of schooling, Dung Tu replied nonchalantly. Feng Ai sensed her nonchalant tone, speaking seriously. Although the responsibility of a forensic officer is to examine corpses, knowing how to read is also necessary. The autopsy report requires our signatures, so we need to know what's written on it. Furthermore, I don't want you to become a forensic officer, but rather to assist from the sidelines. Your main task will also involve writing, so you must know how to read and write. Dung Tu just felt regretful about her years of education. She didn't actually disregard this. She still wanted to learn language and writing here, especially when Feng Ai mentioned it so seriously. She quickly adjusted her attitude, showing her deep desire to learn. Whether Dung Tu exaggerated or not, knowing she was willing to learn, Feng Ai finally felt satisfied. The books at home were too difficult for Dung Tu to understand, so he bought her 2 simple children's books when passing by the bookstore, planning to teach her later. Feng Ai's perseverance in this matter exceeded Dung Tu's imagination, to the point that the first thing they did when they returned home was to teach her how to read. The characters here weren't the same as the traditional characters Dung Tu had imagined, but they were somewhat similar. Therefore, Dung Tu learned quite quickly, which made Feng Ai very pleased, even a little surprised. But this satisfaction didn't last long. When Feng Ai looked at the crooked writing on the paper, he couldn't help but feel a sense of, indeed, shouldn't expect too much from her. Dung Tu didn't need to look to know how bad her writing was. She couldn't even remember the last time she wrote with a pen. She was only confident that she knew how to hold a pen. But with an accepting attitude towards fate, she didn't feel ashamed. On the contrary, she raised her head with a hopeful expression, waiting to be praised. What? Feng Ai was completely surprised by Dung Tu's reaction, who seemed to be at a loss for words. For a first attempt, it's not bad. His voice sounded increasingly awkward. Feng Ai couldn't believe that Dung Tu actually praised her. Even though it was obviously reluctant, it was enough to surprise anyone. Dung Tu felt a bit embarrassed and put down the pen, deliberately turning to look out the window, pretending to be surprised. "Oh, it's late. I have to go cook." And with that, he hurriedly left the room. Feng Ai realized that Dung Tu wasn't good at making excuses because since they met, every time she had something to do, she used cooking as an excuse, even sometimes before mealtime. She would rush into the kitchen to prove her point, and that day's meal would definitely have a pot of soup simmered for a long time. In fact, Feng Ai felt a bit embarrassed about it. However, today it was actually time for lunch. He stepped out of the room, saw the sky outside. The sun was at its peak. The smell of food was in the air, perhaps even from their own kitchen. Suddenly, Feng Ai felt a bit dreamy. He was married now, and with a woman he hadn't known for long, it was really quite an anticipation. The future life. The sunlight was a bit dazzling. Feng Ai squinted, then saw He Nung standing at the kitchen door calling him. "Feng Ai, it's time for lunch." Dung Tu felt a bit strange about the way Feng Ai looked at her while eating. But then again, she always seemed strange, even last night on their wedding night. She felt initially he didn't look at her with desire, but with a scrutinizing and probing gaze, which made her feel creepy. Fortunately, he returned to normal afterwards. Otherwise, she would have doubted if she had been kicked off the bed. So, even though she noticed Feng Ai's strange gaze now, Dung Tu remained calm, and there was no discomfort even after lunch ended. As for the embarrassment from earlier, it could be easily brushed off. It seemed that besides moving to an empty room, marriage didn't bring much change to their lives. Apart from eating, sleeping, and physiological needs, the only activity was practicing writing. Dung Tu felt that if this continued, she would soon master the bustling city. Fortunately, after a few rounds of investigation, the last case finally made some progress. Although Feng Ai didn't care, Dung Tu was still very interested in the first case she participated in. When comparing the past of the 2 victims, a rather eccentric character had appeared within everyone's sight, and that was Lu Ni, who lived in the small alley of Owi with the widow Lu. Lu Ni had been married twice, but both wives left him because they felt he was too poor. He would often buy goods from the local stores in town and then resell them in the surrounding villages. Vuong Tuan Duc's wife had actually returned home on the same day that Lu Ni went to sell his wares in that village. Initially, no one suspected him because he seemed very normal that day, not returning later than usual and not interacting with Vuong Tuan Duc's wife. However, A few days before the death of Lu's widow, someone saw Lu Ni enter her courtyard. People in Oe often bought from Lu Ni out of convenience, but this single coincidence raised suspicions. But after investigation, all of Lu Ni's acquaintances spoke highly of him, describing him as a simple and unassuming person who never held grudges against anyone, not even against Vung Tuan Duk's wife or Lu's widow, whom he didn't even know. He had no motive for murder. Just as this suspect was about to be ruled out, Dung Tu suddenly disappeared. Fung Ngai came to report, saying Dung Tu had gone to the market to buy vegetables in the morning, but hadn't returned yet, even though it was past noon. When they inquired at the market, they were told she had already left a long time ago after buying her vegetables. Since Dung Tu never left the house and didn't know anyone, she couldn't have gone to a friend's place, so she must have disappeared. Everyone looked at Fung Ngai's calm face, devoid of any emotion, understanding that this time he was truly angry, a silent anger even more terrifying than an explosive one. Thi Huabing raised his hand. Search for her immediately. Although logically, one couldn't conclude someone was missing after just a few hours, his powerful position allowed him to authorize this. After searching with no results, suddenly a soldier suggested quietly, "Could she have been abducted by the culprit of this case?" "Impossible. Why would the culprit abduct Mrs. Fung?" Dung Tip Din said beside him. Dung Tu hadn't been in this town for long, rarely interacted with outsiders, and as the wife of a funeral worker, she had nothing to do with the case. So why would anyone abduct her? Whether right or wrong, it needed to be investigated for peace of mind. Fung Ngai directly inquired about the suspect before heading to Lu Ni's house to find Dung Tu. "Hey, we're just suspecting at this point. Barging in like this is invading someone's home." The Huabing intercepted Fung Ngai, who was getting a bit too hot-headed. Usually indifferent, he unexpectedly cared deeply about the new bride, which made him seem more humane, quite pleasing, but he couldn't let him cause chaos. Fung Ngai was halted by Thi Huabin, his demeanor growing colder. He pursed his lips, finally turning to Thi Huabin to say, "So what should we do? Just sit back and wait for something to happen?" The thought of her being injured, perhaps even lifeless, in front of him was unacceptable to Fung Ngai. His principles absolutely forbade anyone from causing harm. Finally, Thi Huabing relented. "All right, take a few people with you and tell them it's for the investigation, but don't take unnecessary risks." Dung Tu felt that in the future, she should consult the almanac before going out, not out of superstition, but out of caution. Initially, today, her father-in-law couldn't leave the house because a child was bothering him, so she went to the market alone. After buying vegetables, she absent-mindedly glanced down that alley on her way back, then nothing. She had fainted quite thoroughly. When she woke up, her mind still felt foggy. Looking around, it was very dark, unable to tell if it was because it was night outside or because there was no light in this place. Her limbs were immobile, bound to the bed. This situation, Dung Tu wanted to cry. Who could tell her what had happened? Seemingly to answer her questions, after half a day of stillness, Dung Tu heard the sound of the door opening, then saw a man carrying an oil lamp coming towards her. The man's appearance was very ordinary, nothing particularly remarkable. Dung Tu's first reaction upon seeing him was, "Never met, don't know, probably no grudges." So she cautiously asked, "Are you the one who brought me here?" "Yes." The man's answer was without hesitation, calm from start to finish. "Do we have any grudges?" Seeing the man in front of her didn't seem too ruthless, Dung Tu could only pray he had mistaken her. "So you're going to be accused by the authorities." She tried to persuade him if she could reason with him. Accused by the authorities. Clearly, Dung Tu's advice had no effect whatsoever. The man in front of her seemed to flick a switch, suddenly becoming frenzied. Women like you all must die. Must die. I'm innocent. I act on heaven's orders." Dungtu was taken aback by this sudden turn of events, a bit slow to react. How could someone so normal suddenly go mad like this? The man in front of her showed no signs of calming down. Instead, he suddenly advanced, gripping Dungtu's chin and producing a small porcelain bottle from his person, thrusting it into her mouth. Dungtu's instincts screamed that this was definitely not something good. She struggled with all her might, refusing to swallow. She managed to spit out half of the medicine, but the other half still went down. Seeing this, the man's crazed eyes grew even wilder, cursing, "Damn it!" Dungtu's head buzzed with a ringing sound, tears flowing naturally down her cheeks. Her face flushed and a few drops of tears appeared somewhat weak. But this demeanor only fueled the hidden rage within the man before her, rather than appeasing him. He grew even angrier. "Woman, shameless, have you no shame?" He cursed at Dungtu. If Dungtu was confused and fearful earlier, she was now in sheer horror. She suddenly thought of the unsolved case from the past few days. You, were you the one who harmed those two women? Her voice trembled as she recalled the scene of the two victims' bodies, hoping her speculation was wrong. The man suddenly burst into laughter, a laughter tinged with something sinister. "What? Them? Ha ha! They took their own lives. For women like them, nothing could be more fitting." He laughed as he looked at Dungtu, then leaned in close and whispered in her ear, "You'll soon meet them again. Even though you wasted half the dose of the drug, it's still enough." His breath against Dungtu's neck made her hold her breath, a chill rising within her. By now, her clothes had been stripped off, and his hands gently caressed her body, as if admiring it. "So seductive, aren't you? Using this body to seduce men, aren't you?" Throughout, Dungtu had no idea what he was talking about, her only sensation being pervert. But she knew her situation was dire. She could only try to buy time, hoping Feng Gai would soon realize she was missing. "I'm not seducing anyone. Do you even know who I am? I'm married." "Yes, you're married. Just a few days ago, you married Feng Gai. The whole town knows. Not long before that, we even saw you in the arms of another man," the man said, his eyes oozing undisguised contempt. "In the arms of another man?" Dungtu was utterly perplexed. She didn't even know many men, let alone have any intimate relations. If anything, she could only recall the fearful embrace with Dung Titru. Realization struck her suddenly. Could it be that after committing the murder that day, he didn't leave but instead lurked nearby to observe? But if so, why kill her? The wife of Vuong Tuan Duk and the widow of Lu? Dungtu cautiously inquired. "Harlot! All harlots!" The man's face contorted into a vicious expression. "Nothing but immoral harlots." He cursed her as a shameless woman, then claimed the other two women were not faithful wives. Dungtu Fu felt she understood the reason for his murders, so she spoke in line with his thoughts. "I heard Hung Yi, the wife of Vuong Tuan Duk, was gentle in nature. How could she not be a faithful wife?" Faithful wife? If I hadn't seen her being promiscuous with another man in the deserted field that day while I was selling goods in her village, I wouldn't have thought that woman could be so shameless. The man's voice grew angrier, as if he had been crowned with horns. Moreover, Mrs. Lu, the widow, didn't remain virtuous for her husband either. She spent her days entangled with men, truly shameless. And you, just like the two wretches in my house, are all harlots. Rotten harlots. The man's rage intensified as he spoke, giving the impression that he might kill Dungtu on the spot. Dungtu was terrified by this situation, her eyes wide open, her body trembling uncontrollably. "Oh God, please don't prolong this and hasten my death." In front of her was a horrified gaze, her sudden shift in expression from fear to pleading. The man glanced, calmly saying, "Don't worry, I won't let you die too quickly. Wait for the poison to take effect. You'll know yourself." His voice was deep, authoritative, and self-assured. After speaking, his deep gaze swept over Dungtu once. Then he took the oil lamp and left. Oh God, truly insane. Dungtu felt her skin crawl under his gaze, waiting for him to leave, unable to hold back her silent curse. Thinking about how he had poured half the bottle of poison into her, her fear grew even stronger, hoping for someone to come and rescue her. She was in darkness, completely naked, feeling cold but unable to do anything. Suddenly, Dungtu felt her body heating up from the inside out, but couldn't understand why she felt hot when it wasn't cold. Before Dungtu could think, the heat intensified. In just a moment, she felt like her body was about to ignite, craving something. Dungtu wasn't naive. Thinking about the man's words, she quickly understood the key. Oh God! She wondered which nerve he had tampered with. She had never seen anyone kill like this. The drug was indeed potent. In just a moment, Dungtu felt her consciousness fading, faintly hearing noises, then feeling a cold object approaching her. Truly comfortable. She couldn't resist the approach. How, Tien? Is there someone downstairs? Feng Ai asked as she approached the cellar door. Everyone searched but found no one had left. Only Feng Ai felt something was wrong. Thinking that all merchants had cellars, Feng Ai decided to go down and search. Feng Ai saw Dungtu continuously trying to make contact with her, even attempting to embrace her. Thinking about the results of the body examination, it was clear she had been poisoned. Feng Ai narrowed her eyes, removed her outer garment, wrapped Dungtu in it, and called out loudly, "It's okay, we've found her. I'll be out soon." Everyone saw Dungtu wrapped in Feng Ai's clothes, but still attempting to make contact, understanding what had happened. They worried for Dungtu, thinking about the poison Lu Yi had given her. If not for Feng Ai's perseverance, the consequences would have been unpredictable. After bringing Lu Yi back home, Feng Ai hurriedly took Dungtu to Hoi Sundung. He knew little about medicine, understanding that the medicine Lu Yi had given her was not just for ordinary purposes. Indeed, at Hoi Sundung, after checking Dungtu's pulse, the great Dr. Li squinted and exclaimed, "Who is so cruel?" He placed his hand on Dungtu's wrist, as if to confirm something. This is a potent poison from the Imperial Palace. Just a little, and its effect is very powerful. Now the lady is lying here. Hasn't she been given quite a bit of poison? If the usual methods are used to detoxify, I'm afraid it won't be enough. I will write a prescription. You must quickly prepare the medicine for the lady. As the great Dr. Li spoke, he took a pen, preparing to write the prescription, instructing. The detoxification requires half an hour. During this time, you should soak her in cold well water. Wait for the full time, and the effect of the medicine will be effective. Then, administer the entire medicine to the lady. Only then can we hope for detoxification. Tomorrow, upon waking, administer another set of medicine, and that should be fine. Feng Ai's face turned pale, so angry she wanted to immediately find Lu Yi for revenge. Hearing great Dr. Li sigh, he said, "This medicine, although powerful, is ultimately harmful to the body. In the next 2 days, you must take good care of her." Seeing Dungtu continuously pulling at her clothes, Feng Ai didn't hesitate, quickly preparing the medicine, worried that Dungtu might lose consciousness while soaking, so she called for Kotham to help. Kotham, seeing Dungtu's condition, felt heartbroken, blaming himself for not going out with her. Feng Ai was also in turmoil, not knowing how to comfort, so she could only speak with a hint of irritation. Now, first help Dungtu detoxify. We'll discuss other matters later. Kotham paid no attention to Feng Ai's attitude, wiped his tears, and with a single "who" hastily went to prepare the medicine. Once the medicine was prepared, under the influence of the cold water, Dungtu regained some consciousness. Recognizing Feng Ai in front of her, she felt relieved. At this moment, Dung-tu began to blur again due to the effects of the medicine, only acting on instinct. Feng-ai struggled to get the medicine bowl down Dung-tu's throat. When she placed the bowl on the table and turned around, she saw Dung-tu had accidentally let the blanket slip off. With no fabric covering her body, the scene was laid bare before them. Feng-ai wasn't Liu Hahui, and moreover, her task was to administer the medicine to her, so she felt no hesitation. Feng-ai quickly approached the bed, transforming from 3 steps into 2. Dung-tu, long tormented by the effects of the medicine, felt comforted under Feng-ai's kiss, but still felt something lacking, emitting a faint moan, urging her to act quickly. Feng-ai, in the face of her wife's initiative, though aware it was due to the medicine, couldn't help but lose her gentle demeanor, swiftly taking action to address the issue. Overwhelmed by sensation, Dung-tu let out a surprised gasp, unable to contain her reception. After a passionate exchange, the two gradually regained their breath. Though the effects of the medicine had lessened, they were still potent. Before long, Dung-tu involuntarily nestled against Feng-ai once more, and they continued until the moon rose high, the heavy breathing in the room finally subsiding. The next day, upon waking up, Feng-ai was no longer in bed, avoiding the awkward moment after a long night. In a daze, Dung-tu recalled the events of the previous night under Feng-ai's assistance. The sky was not yet pitch black, but for the past 2 days, she had regularly drifted into late sleep. After the passionate encounter last night, although Dung-tu was not as shy as other ancient women, she still felt ashamed. She rubbed her sore waist, feeling so embarrassed that she didn't want to leave the bed. At that moment, the sound of Feng-ai's footsteps drew near again, and then he entered, holding a cup of medicine. "Are you awake? First, drink this medicine. Li, the pharmacist, said you need to take it again." Feng-ai rarely spoke with such a gentle tone. Dung-tu suddenly felt herself reacting without thinking, forgetting the sense of shame, and mechanically accepted the cup of medicine to drink. As the bitter taste of the medicine spread in her mouth, she frowned, snapping back into a state of alertness, her eyes carrying a hint of reproach as she looked at Feng-ai. Feng-ai seemed amused by her bewildered expression, his mouth curving up in a smile, his eyes gleaming with humor. However, his smile quickly vanished as he shifted to a look of indignation. The case of Lu Ni has been thoroughly investigated, and T has decided on execution. In 5 days, it will be carried out. Will you want to go then? Lu Ni? Dung-tu's expression was confused, not understanding why she was being asked if she wanted to go or not. Feng-ai initially thought that Dung-tu knew who had abducted her, but seeing her expression, he realized that she probably didn't know the person's name, so he explained, "That's the person who kidnapped you. I think after the suffering you endured at his hands, you'd want to see his fate." Dung-tu remembered the feeling of helplessness when she was held captive in the darkness, the humiliation of being stripped naked, and the fear of approaching death. She feared she would never forget these experiences. Although she was currently safe lying here, unharmed, her heart still yearned to see the villain brought to justice. Dung-tu didn't expect Feng-ai to come and talk to her about this. Her eyes looked at him with a different glimmer of light. "Of course, I'll go," Dung-tu replied firmly. "In the coming days, you just stay at home to recover. I'll take you to the execution later." "Where have you been these days?" Dung-tu asked abruptly, feeling surprised. She had begun to rely on him after Feng-ai saved her, but she didn't expect herself to blurt out such a direct question. Feng-ai paused for a moment before responding. "These days, if I didn't have anything to do, I stayed at home." "Oh." Dung-tu nodded, not knowing what else to say, feeling a bit embarrassed in front of him, only able to lower her head and look at the blanket. The crimson blanket with the embroidered image of a pair of mandarin ducks was truly beautiful. Feng Ai wasn't one to talk much, so he simply said, "Rest up, I'll leave first." After leaving the room, Feng Ai didn't have any specific tasks to do. He just felt the atmosphere between them was a bit suffocating, so he withdrew, feeling like he was running away. A gentle breeze passed by, making him realize his foolishness, a big man like him being swayed by a woman's emotions. Initially, saving her was just a passing interest, but now it seemed like she was controlling him. He didn't know that the biggest mistake men make is to develop an interest in a woman, which is the beginning of chaos. In the garden, there was a maple tree entering autumn. Most of its leaves had fallen, leaving only a few. Under the tree, Feng Ai opened the book The Chronicles of Imperial Crimes, a book he loved. Every time he read it, it brought knowledge and contemplation. But now, the image of Dung Tu from last night appeared in his mind. The book The Chronicles of Imperial Crimes, which Feng Ai had long loved, was now causing him to be distracted. Each time he opened it, it always brought knowledge and contemplation. But now, he only saw the image of Dung Tu with affectionate eyes and a gentle demeanor lingering in his mind. He couldn't help but feel a headache, rubbing his temples, then throwing the book aside, deciding to get up and check on Dung Tu. Entering the room, the space was quiet. Only the sound of gentle breathing could be heard. Feng Ai recognized that Dung Tu, after taking the medicine, had fallen back into a deep sleep. How long had she just woken up? Perhaps because of the exhaustion from yesterday, worry, fear, and fatigue. He couldn't help but smile affectionately, gently tucking the blanket down over Dung Tu's shoulders, then quietly closing the door and retreating outside. At that moment, Feng Ai didn't realize that his gaze towards Dung Tu had become so tender. 5 days had passed quickly, and the warm affection between the two had even caused Koth Hum, who occasionally visited Dung Tu, to couldn't help but chuckle, exclaiming, "Such a great escape surely brings great blessings in the future." Feng Ai took her hand to the market, where people had gathered. Although this was quite bloody, for the common folk who had no entertainment, it was an unmissable joy, especially witnessing the cruel murderer being beheaded, which was even more fascinating than a novel. Lu Ni, bound and kneeling on the execution platform, seemed to show no fear of death, instead wearing an expression of dissatisfaction. Dung Tu thought perhaps he was mentally disturbed due to being abandoned by his 2 wives. But no matter what, she still believed that even if a mentally ill patient committed murder, they should bear appropriate responsibility. Otherwise, wouldn't it be unfair for the innocent victims? Under the platform, the surrounding crowd was buzzing, hearing someone say, "Who would have thought that Lu Ni, who usually looks gentle, could cause such a crazy incident? Oh, poor guy. He's also pitiful, marrying 2 wives then being abandoned by both. Wouldn't anyone go crazy? I think he's definitely gone mad. Look at him, facing execution and still showing no fear at all," someone sighed. In my opinion, those 2 women should also be thrown into the river of damnation. All day seducing men, they deserve to be punished. This statement was a bit too much, so someone objected. "What are you saying? It's like you're not the murderer yourself. No matter how many mistakes they've made, they should be handled by the authorities. You can't just take the law into your own hands and execute people like that." So the crowd argued heatedly, until the hour of the horse, around 11 a.m., Thi Hua Bin threw down the death warrant and loudly announced, "Execute!" Everyone fell silent. Only the executioner, holding a bowl of wine, took a sip, sprayed it onto the blade of the sword, then raised the sword and brought it down. Dung Tu, although eloquent in speech, still turned her head away at the moment the blade fell, unable to look at the scene. The surroundings were silent until there was a thud as the body rolled, and then the crowd became noisy again. Dung-tu only turned her head back briefly, then dared not look anymore. Lu-ni was a lonely figure with no loved ones, so the task of disposing of the body fell to Feng-ai. Seeing Dung-tu dared to look at Lu-ni's body, Feng-ai walked to the execution platform and instructed Dung-tu to follow behind. Sewing the decapitated head back on, wrapping it in a grass mat, digging a haphazard grave in the cemetery. The case was considered closed. Although the case caused quite a stir, after its conclusion, aside from providing another story for storytellers, it seemed to have no effect on people's lives. Feng-ai returned to her usual state at home, very concerned about Dung-tu's temporary halt in learning due to the trauma of the past few days. Ko-thum noticed the young couple living harmoniously, happy every day, which made Dung-tu a bit speechless. Feng-ai worked seriously, and her teaching was also very strict. Every time she saw the characters Dung-tu wrote resembling cows, her face could drip ink to continue writing a large page of characters, then make her rewrite it. Enduring physical and mental torment every day, Dung-tu felt like she had lost weight. She was interested in practicing characters, but not in this way. She didn't want to become a literati in the future. Actually, although Feng-ai worked seriously, she wasn't too strict with Dung-tu, who was just learning to write. It's just that she realized she cared more and more about her, wanting to be with her more, but didn't know how to be with her, so she could only use this method to spend more time with her. If Dung-tu knew his thoughts, she would surely cry. Oh, there are so many ways to be together. Why resort to tormenting her like this? Nowadays, every day she thinks, as a state official, how could Feng-ai be so idle, not even needing to go to work to stamp anything? Oh my. It's not that she's malicious, but she really hopes that something will happen now to give Feng-ai something to do, to stop tormenting her. Nowadays, Dung-tu gets excited every time she hears a knock on the door, whether it's Ko-thum looking for her to go shopping, or Ko-thum's child coming to invite her to play. Anything that can help her temporarily escape from that feather pen. It's strange. Ko-thum's child Dai-bao, although very afraid of Feng-ai, is very fond of Dung-tu, even enduring immense psychological pressure to come and play with Dung-tu frequently, making Dung-tu like him even more, while Feng-ai becomes increasingly annoyed the more she looks at him. Dung-tu sees Feng-ai glaring at Dai-bao's retreating figure with undisguised dislike and suddenly asks, "In the future, if we have children and he turns out like that, will you also dislike him like that?" Feng-ai replies without hesitation, "Our child won't be disliked like that." Being a latecomer, Ko-thum and her husband had a hard time getting pregnant, and with the added tragedy of losing her husband not long after their son was born, Ko-thum couldn't help but be a bit more affectionate towards her child, so this child was somewhat spoiled. When the child was 2 or 3 years old, Feng-ai was exhausted by him, so every time she saw Dai-bao, her face darkened, and Dai-bao also saw him as if he were a demon. Thinking of the two of them looking at each other with disgust, Dung-tu wanted to laugh but held it in. Then asked, "Which child isn't mischievous? If our child is like that, would you still not like him?" Seemingly thinking of something unpleasant, Feng-ai's expression almost lost control, and in the end he pursed his lips and said, "No." But the tone seemed to suggest that if that were the case, it would be better to just strangle him. Unexpectedly, Feng-ai, who usually seems indifferent, is afraid of mischievous children. Dung-tu feels that in the future, she can imagine Feng-ai being helpless against a troublesome child, and just thinking about it makes her laugh. But for now, she's still young, and they have to wait another 2 years to have children. Feng Ngai didn't know that Dung Tu planned to wait another 2 years before having children. He thought she wanted to have children, and thinking about that scene made his hair stand on end, but if she wanted it, he could endure it. After all, in the end, men still felt excited when it came to having a wife and children, so it might not be as bad as he thought. Maybe? Anyway, he really enjoyed the process of having children. With that in mind, Feng Ngai seemed to have imagined how tonight would go. However, the sound of knocking on the door brought them back to reality, and Dung Tu once again smiled and opened the door, thinking it was Ko Thum coming to find her for something. As a result, standing outside was a middle-aged man he didn't recognize. The man looked about 40 years old, dressed quite elegantly, and when he saw Dung Tu open the door, he bowed and greeted. "You must be Mrs. Feng, right? I'm Trun Tuan, the steward of the Trio family's branch. May I ask if Miss Feng is at home?" "She's in the courtyard. Do you have something to talk to her about?" Dung Tu opened the door to let him in. Trun Tuan stepped in and saw Feng Ngai standing in the courtyard, then said, "The thing is, our young lady was found hanging herself in her room today, and we need Mr. Feng to help with dressing the body." Trun Tuan's words were both a reply to Dung Tu and a clear indication of his intention to find Feng Ngai. In the previous dynasty, because of the failure of the main family to produce offspring, followed by the failure of the eldest wife to bear children, and even siblings killing each other, this movement had spread widely, ultimately leading to the decline of major families and the weakening of national strength. Therefore, this dynasty learned from its mistakes and enacted laws, especially regarding the death of young men and women in the family. Regardless of the cause of death, they must invite professionals to dress the bodies to avoid innocent people being harmed. The daughter of the Trio family just turned 18 and suddenly died, so naturally, they had to invite a professional to come. While this was referred to as an invitation, in reality, it was also the responsibility of the court professionals, and naturally, they couldn't refuse. So after hearing Trun Tuan's words, Feng Ngai immediately said, "Trun Steward, please wait for me for a moment. I'll go to the room to get my things, and then we'll leave together." In no time, Feng Ngai took out a small box. She brought this box with her every time she conducted post-mortem examinations, and Dung Tu had seen it before. Inside, aside from some necessary items for the examination, such as plaster, chisels, there were also some small knives, syringes of various sizes, just the things he usually used. Following Trun Tuan to the Trio family's house, they were greeted by a man in his 40s, slightly chubby, who stepped forward to welcome them, saying, "Mr. Feng has arrived. I am the head of the Trio family. Please come inside." With that, he led everyone to the second door. On the way, he added, "My daughter has troubled Mr. Feng. The Trio family had a relatively high status in this town, but they treated everyone with great respect." At this moment, with a sad expression on his face, everyone could see how much he loved his daughter. Since the deceased was already gone, Feng Ngai didn't say anything, just bowed and went to see the deceased. Dung Tu could only follow behind, feeling somewhat guilty as he looked at the somewhat distressed old man and said, "My condolences to you, sir." Trio Vienguai didn't pay attention to Feng Ngai's attitude. He had lived in this town for many years and understood the reserved nature of this court professional. Moreover, those who regularly dealt with corpses but still smiled tended to make people shudder even more. Dung Tu had initially thought that the position of a court professional in ancient times was relatively low, but since interacting with him, Dung Tu realized that people respected him to some extent, and Trio Vienguai's treatment towards him was also very respectful, not just reverential. This made her understand that perhaps this Triu Vienguai was also quite skilled in the profession of a court professional. So it wasn't strange for him to be so idle and still well off. After chatting for a while, everyone arrived at the room of the young lady of the Trio family. Her body had been removed from the scaffold she hanged herself on, and now she lay neatly dressed on the bed, appearing as if she were asleep. The young lady of the Trio family looked gentle and graceful, embodying the charm of a woman from the Nanjing region. A young lady like her, having to end her life like this, made Dung Tu feel quite heartbroken. In contrast, Feng Ai, accustomed to such scenes, showed no change in expression. After signaling for everyone to leave, he began to remove the clothing from the deceased. At this point, the face of Chiu Theojia, standing beside him, became somewhat unpleasant. His younger sister's body, still unmarried, being looked upon by a young man like this, made him, as the elder brother, feel uncomfortable. However, the expression on Chiu Theojia's face was somewhat peculiar, as if. Dung Tu couldn't quite articulate the feeling, only knowing that something was amiss. Feng Ai, being a man, especially a married man, upon noticing the uneasy expression on Chiu Theojia's face, understood its significance. It was the feeling of anger when his woman was violated. Acting like this towards his own blood sister, as the elder brother, surely something strange was happening. Quickly, the abnormalities on the corpse confirmed Feng Ai's assumptions. To be sure, Feng Ai checked again carefully. At this point, Triu Vienguai also noticed something was off and asked, "Master Feng, is something wrong?" Feng Ai didn't say anything. Matters of disgrace like this shouldn't be spoken aloud. He had a low emotional quotient, but wasn't foolish. He seemed to be considering his words carefully. Feng Ai then asked, "May I inquire, was Miss Triu engaged?" "Our daughter was only betrothed a few months ago to the son of the Wu family in Lum district. They were planning to marry next spring, but now." Triu Vienguai didn't understand Feng Ai's implication, answering honestly, but his words were filled with sadness. Men shedding tears wasn't easy, and Triu Vienguai could only endure it. His pained expression made even Dung Tu, an outsider, feel sympathetic. The son of the Wu family in Lum district was one of the few scholars in the surrounding counties. He was ethical and polite, ran a private school, and often taught people to read. He had a good reputation, and each of their 3 sons was talented and virtuous, inheriting their father's qualities. There was nothing but praise for them. Yet, Feng Ai still asked, "So did Miss Triu have private dealings with Mr. Wu?" This was damaging to his daughter's honor. No matter how good Triu Vienguai's temperament was, he couldn't help but become upset. "What do you mean, Master Feng? My daughter has always been modest and virtuous. How could she have private dealings with a man?" Dung Tu was also stunned, looking at Feng Ai with astonishment, unable to understand why he would say such a thing. In this era, the rules of interaction between men and women were highly regarded. Regarding the relationship between Dung Tu and Feng Ai, if they weren't married, Dung Tu's reputation could be damaged. Therefore, Dung Tu agreed to marry Feng Ai, understanding this from Kotham. Apart from marrying him, she had no other choice. Therefore, even though Miss Triu was engaged to Mr. Wu, such private matters were inappropriate. Now that she was someone else's wife, she was even less bound. Feng Ai realized he had intended to speak tactfully, but only made matters more complicated, so he had to speak directly. "Triu Vienguai, I examined Miss Triu's body just now and found deep neck compression marks, abnormal signs on the throat bones, and clear signs of hanging suicide. But..." Feng Ai paused for a moment, then continued. "But Miss Triu was about 3 months pregnant. In another half month, it will be obvious." After Feng Ai finished speaking, his eyes filled with remorse as he looked at Triu Vienguai, as if he had just endured a heavy blow. "That's why I asked you like that, hoping to be forgiven." Trieu Viên didn't expect Phương Ai to say such words. His daughter always understood propriety. She couldn't engage in frivolous affairs. But he also knew Phương Ai had no reason to tarnish his daughter's reputation. The pain of losing his daughter, coupled with this shock, made him feel as if he couldn't stand steady. Thankfully, Trieu Công Tu was there to support him. Trieu Công Tu was now very good at controlling his emotions. His face showed a mix of sorrow and disbelief, but the quickly distorted expression earlier didn't escape Dung Tu's notice. Her suspicions about this pair of siblings grew stronger, always feeling that something was off about them. She couldn't help but look at Phương Ai, only to see that he had already regained his expressionless face. Trieu Viên today Miss Trieu committed suicide for unknown reasons. And now we've discovered she was pregnant before marriage. I'm afraid this matter should be handed over to the authorities. Trieu Viên hesitated. Handing this matter over to the authorities for investigation would likely ruin his daughter's reputation. Now that she was gone, he didn't want her to leave behind a tarnished name. Seeing Trieu Viên worry, Phương Ai spoke firmly. "This case seems suspicious. We need to open an investigation, and furthermore, do you want your daughter to die unjustly?" Trieu Viên also felt heartbroken for his daughter. Hearing Phương Ai's words, he knew there was no negotiating this matter, so his expression wavered slightly. In contrast, Vu Công Tu next to him appeared very angry. "Regardless of the reason, do you want my sister to suffer an unjust reputation even after death, to be scorned by others?" Phương Ai remained silent. Instead, Dung Tu, beside him, couldn't understand his logic. Just for his honor, does he want his sister to die unjustly? The person is dead, yet you don't think about seeking justice for her. Instead, you're afraid she'll tarnish your honor. This is turning principles upside down, and he says it so confidently? After finishing her words, seeing the faces of Vu Công Tu and Trieu Viên become grim, she knew her words weren't suitable for her status, so she changed her tone to something gentler. "Moreover, I believe Thi Hoa Binh will understand Miss Trieu's situation and will find an appropriate solution." To ensure the reliability of her words, she looked at Phương Ai and asked, "Isn't that so?" Phương Ai nodded gently, yes, as if agreeing with her. Thus, the matter was decided. Phương Ai requested Trieu Viên to find someone to inform the family, and he would wait here. During the wait, Trieu Viên and Vu Công Tu stayed with Phương Ai. Unable to understand, Dung Tu often glanced at Vu Công Tu, unable to decipher her intentions. If she couldn't understand Dung Tu's small intentions, Phương Ai really wanted to take her home and scold her. She kept looking at another man in front of her husband and seemed lost in thought. Trieu Viên residence was in the southern part of the city, just a 2-block walk from the family home. Thi Hoa Binh and the others quickly arrived at Trieu's house. After signaling for a less formal approach, he began to inquire about the situation. Since it was initially just a routine check without an autopsy report, Phương Ai described the autopsy process, while Dung Tu listened and took notes beside her. Through the tireless efforts of the two for over a month, she had successfully mastered the skills of filling out autopsy forms. The body could be confirmed as a suicide, but the additional truth was that she was pregnant, making the reason for suicide worth considering. Thi Hoa Binh first asked the father and son of the family, who both appeared saddened and shocked by the incident, hoping he could keep this secret from getting out. Not gaining much, Thi Hoa Binh nodded to indicate understanding, then sent someone to find the family's personal maidservant. The maidservant seemed to understand the situation well. When asked, she seemed flustered. "Miss, for a few months now, she's always seemed off, And who would have thought that today? Did she say Miss Triot was always in a bad mood? Specifically, when did it start? Thi Huabing continued to inquire. The maidservant thought for a moment. It was when the old master arranged her marriage. She said so and glanced at Vu Kongtu before continuing. Initially, when she learned of her engagement, the young miss was very happy, as if relieved, but then she began to become melancholy, often sitting by the window in a daze. Did he know Miss Triot was pregnant? The young miss didn't say, but recently, the young miss has been complaining of poor health, not eating much, and her menstruation has been absent for a long time, but we all didn't dare to guess. The maidservant's expression was not so much shocked as it was embarrassed for having discovered some secret. The atmosphere was a bit awkward for a while. Dungtu also understood this was her fault, so she could only pretend as if nothing had happened and change the subject. I noticed something was off with Triot Kongtu. He seemed very strange when he heard Miss Triot say she was pregnant. I noticed his gaze was very odd when you were helping her undress. Feng Ai seemed to have been successfully diverted by Dungtu, but if one listened closely to his tone, it could be recognized that he had not forgotten what had just happened. But you must have noticed, even if he's not the culprit, there is suspicion. Dungtu hesitated a bit, partly because she sensed Feng Ai's dismissive attitude, and partly because she understood that without any solid evidence, nothing could be done about Triot Kongtu. Feng Ai didn't respond to her, but said, "Let's go back. This isn't something you should worry about." After saying that, she grabbed her hand and walked ahead. This time, Dungtu didn't dare to resist. Moreover, this time Feng Ai used quite a bit of force, and she couldn't break free. When they returned to the courtyard, Dungtu's wrist had turned red in a circle. Feng Ai noticed it, but said nothing, simply leaving her alone in the courtyard and walking straight into the bedroom. In the room, there was a long, wide bookshelf. Since Feng Ai didn't have a separate room for reading, all the books were placed here. At this moment, she picked up a book and sat at the table, but even after half a day, she hadn't turned a page, only thinking about how Dungtu had defied her earlier, making her angry for no reason. Normally, she always yielded to her, and the result, this ungrateful woman. Now Dungtu stood alone in the courtyard, feeling a bit bewildered herself. She didn't expect Feng Ai's feelings to be so clearly revealed. When she first met him, she understood he was a stable and affectionate person, but now, just because, she resisted him? Upon careful thought, something didn't seem right. Standing in the courtyard, breathing in the cold air for a while, Dungtu ultimately felt this was entirely her fault. She then went into the kitchen to prepare a sumptuous meal before knocking on the bedroom door. Feng Ai opened the door, standing there emotionless. Dungtu suddenly felt a bit tense. The food is ready now. Do you want to eat right now?" Feng Ai nodded. Do you want to eat in the room or the kitchen? Or maybe the courtyard? It's also good to eat in the courtyard now, since the sun has already set." Hearing Dungtu babbling, Feng Ai suddenly smiled, then quickly regained her composure. "Then let's eat in the courtyard," she said. Dungtu still noticed that brief smile. Although she doubted whether it was an illusion or not, it still made her relax a bit, at least showing that he didn't seem too angry. But Dungtu quickly realized she was mistaken. Throughout the meal, Feng Ai remained silent as a clam, not even raising an eyebrow. Until they finished bathing and lay on the bed, Feng Ai still didn't utter a word. Dungtu lay beside her, feeling apprehensive, when suddenly Feng Ai pounced on her, swiftly throwing off their clothes, then eagerly initiating intimacy. During their intimate moment, Feng Ai stared intensely at Dungtu, whispering menacingly, "Don't reject me." Dung Tu felt a bit confused, unsure whether she was referring to something during the day or now, but either way, she could only nod in agreement now. But afterwards, reflecting on his stern attitude, a bit of discomfort lingered in her heart. Dung Tu knew she had a somewhat nervous disposition, but somehow, ever since realizing she might have feelings for Feng Ai, she found it difficult to maintain her composure as before. The next morning, as they woke up, the atmosphere between them was somewhat magical, one unsure how to handle the situation, the other internally conflicted. Throughout the morning, neither of them spoke to each other. Elsewhere, the atmosphere was also a bit tense. The following day, when they came to investigate, Trieu Viennois' attitude had become even sterner. Initially, he was only concerned about his daughter's honor, but deep down, he still wanted a clear investigation. Now, he said directly, "You said my daughter committed suicide, so there's no need to look into anything else." But, Trieu Viennois, it's possible that your daughter was coerced into choosing suicide. Dung Timding stood next to Thi Huabing, using the gentlest tone possible to advise him. "She's already dead. Now, I just want her to rest in peace. I don't want to tarnish her reputation any further." Her daughter's death pained him, but his sons were the backbone of the family. Yesterday, he also noticed the strange behavior of the servants. Upon inquiry, he learned that recently, his son had been frequenting his daughter's chamber, and she had become melancholic after one of his visits. A horrifying thought arose in his mind, making him try to suppress it. Seeing Thi Huabin and his subordinates continuing their investigation, Trieu Viennois' tone turned less cordial. "The law doesn't include investigating suicide, sir. Please refrain from disturbing the peace of my daughter." "You." This attitude, Dung Timding's face darkened slightly, his grip tightening. In the end, it was still Thi Huabin who raised his hand to stop Dung, the minister, from losing his temper, one hand blocking Dung Timding's chest, his face remaining calm as he looked at Trieu Viennois until he saw him break into a cold sweat. Only then did he shift his gaze, turning to his subordinates. "Let's go." "Sir." Everyone was unwilling, several voices speaking up simultaneously. "There's no need to say more. If Trieu Viennois doesn't want to investigate, then let's go." Watching Thi Huabing and his subordinates gradually depart, Trieu Viennois felt a pang of guilt, thinking of his earlier demeanor. But regardless of whether his suspicions were correct or not, he couldn't allow this to continue. With a daughter dead and a capable son, this choice required no deliberation. Even if the likelihood was small, he absolutely couldn't let it happen. Back at the mansion, everyone felt a bit uneasy. Among them, a hot-headed youth spoke directly. "Sir, this case clearly has some suspicion. Are we just going to let it end like this?" Thi Huabin glanced at him, but didn't get angry. Having spirited youth was good, but what do you think you can do? The autopsy ruled it as suicide. The deceased's family doesn't want to cooperate further. There's no evidence, no witnesses, nothing. If you feel something's wrong, are you suggesting we continue investigating? But the other person still wanted to argue, but also had to admit his words made sense. It's just that they still found it hard to accept things this way. Upon hearing that the case was closed, Dung Tu's mood also became difficult to stabilize. To just let someone die like that? What's the point of having laws if they're not enforced? The more she thought about it, the more enraged she became. Coupled with yesterday's incident, she felt no appetite whatsoever. When Kotham brought a bowl of fish, she smelled it and vomited. This was too much. Feeling unwell enough to not want to eat rice was acceptable, but vomiting straight away? Dung Tu's expression was somewhat embarrassed. Kotham paused for 2 seconds, then suddenly became delighted, not noticing Feng Ai still there, directly taking her hand and asking about her last menstruation cycle. Thinking about some possibility, Dung Tu felt a bit confused about her emotions. Joy? Nervousness? Anyway, it seemed quite expectant, foolishly looking at Ko Thum, saying, "It's already a few days late this month." Ko Thum became even more cheerful upon hearing this. "Ah, then it's definitely correct." Then, looking at Feng Ai beside her, who still seemed stunned by what had just happened, she said, "Hey, you little one, why are you still standing there? Go invite the big guy in." "Ah," Feng Ai replied with a single sound before leaving. She even stumbled at the door, only recovering her balance once she reached the clinic and regained her composure. Watching Feng Ai wobble away, Ko Thum chuckled somewhat amusingly. This child must be too happy. Normally, she's not this clumsy. Hearing Ko Thum's words, Dung Tu smiled involuntarily, subconsciously rubbing her belly, the slight discomfort in her heart fading away. Li Daifu made his way over to take everyone's pulse only after their breathing had settled. Seeing everyone's sparkling eyes, he didn't want to spoil the mood and simply smiled brightly. "Congratulations, congratulations. Madam here just has a missed period, but the pregnancy is still early. She just needs proper care." At this moment, everyone felt reassured. Even the corners of Feng Ai's mouth lifted. "Oh, in the future, don't bother cooking anymore. Come over to my place for meals. Just bring along a couple of pairs of chopsticks. It's convenient for you and saves you from the hassle." Suddenly, Ko Thum remembered something. This concern warmed everyone's hearts. Dung Tu chuckled reluctantly. "That's too indulgent already. Cooking is fine?" Li Daifu and Ko Thum were acquainted with each other. At this point, they also spoke up. "Although you shouldn't exert yourself too much, you still need moderate exercise. It'll make giving birth easier later on." Ko Thum blushed at this point. She too had given birth before. Why didn't she know these things? It's just that Feng Ai was a child she watched grow up, while Dung Tu was a girl she cherished. She was a bit overly concerned. Blushing as she bid farewell to Li Daifu, she then turned back to instruct the two on the things to pay attention to during pregnancy. Although Li Daifu had mentioned most of it earlier, there were still some things he didn't feel comfortable mentioning. Usually, when pregnant, you should sleep separately, but in a small household like ours, we don't need to adhere strictly to those rules. However, when sleeping, you must be serious and not lose consciousness. If you don't protect your first child well, it will be very difficult to give birth later on. Ko Thum's tone became serious, no longer smiling as before. She mainly worried that the young couple couldn't restrain themselves and would harm the baby. Ko Thum's words reminded the couple of yesterday's incident, causing them to feel a little embarrassed. They quickly adopted a serious attitude, which also gave Ko Thum some peace of mind. The two behaved normally and obediently, so surely there wouldn't be any issues. That's what Ko Thum thought, and after giving a few more instructions, she felt reassured enough to leave. The two faced each other for a moment, then awkwardly looked away. However, last night, thankfully, didn't affect the unborn child. Thinking this, Feng Ai felt a twinge of regret. He was too impulsive. It seemed that since he saved her, he always seemed a bit agitated in front of her. "You're pregnant, so you should rest more in the future. You don't need to worry about small chores in the house. I'll find a maid," Feng Ai said with a hint of embarrassment. He didn't know what to do, but he had heard quite a bit from Li Daifu and Ko Thum. Dung Tu looked at Feng Ai shyly, then immediately laughed and said, "Look at you, sounding just like Ko Thum. What could happen in the house that requires hiring another servant? Besides, in such a small house, I'm afraid I wouldn't get used to it. If you don't like it, forget it. If there's anything, just ask Ko Thum." Why do I have to say that? I already know. Seeing Feng Ai caring for her like this made Dung Tu feel a bit nervous. Perhaps Feng Ai was being too good to her, making her start to feel arrogant. Although Feng Ai didn't hire anyone, during these days at home, he clearly paid more attention to Dung Tu, even leaving less for her to cook. This really made Dung Tu feel a bit overwhelmed by the favoritism. Snow arrived earlier this year than in previous years. Since knowing she was pregnant, Dung Tu rarely went out. Now, the snow had been falling for half a day without stopping, so she could only stay indoors and continue sewing. "Oh, why are you sewing? This work strains the eyes a lot." Kotum saw Dung Tu sewing as soon as she entered the door and immediately began to object. Seeing Kotum take away the needle, Dung Tu felt a bit helpless. "Although I'm not good at this, I still want to make some things by hand for my child. Why does everyone treat me like a fragile doll? Am I going to break if touched?" Dung Tu had been here for a few months and had learned some sewing skills from Kotum. Although she couldn't say she was skilled, she could still make some simple clothes. This was her first child, so she couldn't help but want to do something for her baby. You shouldn't say that. Pregnant women are precious, especially since it's your first pregnancy. You naturally need to be cared for more carefully. "And where's Feng Ai?" Kotum said, not seeing Feng Ai nearby and then asking. Upon hearing this, Dung Tu felt like laughing. Isn't that just like Kotum, always worried that something might not be right with me? Now he won't even let me cook anymore. Although Feng Ai used to cook on his own before, since Dung Tu arrived, he rarely entered the kitchen. Now it seemed as if he thought she couldn't do anything anymore. That child is not a child anymore, and he's eagerly awaiting the baby too. It's only natural for him to be more concerned. Moreover, 2 days ago, you had severe vomiting, and he was very worried. Kotum thought of her still worried appearance. Now that everything is fine, although vomiting is normal, seeing you unable to eat much was frightening. It's not that serious, and now everything is fine, isn't it? Dung Tu also didn't understand why, when she was nearly 3 months pregnant, her vomiting reaction was so severe. She looked much thinner, but fortunately, it was better now, or she wouldn't be able to bear it anymore. You always talk like that. Kotum took Dung Tu's hand and patted it. The snow has just fallen, and it will get colder. The kitchen stove needs to be refueled frequently, and remember to open the windows for ventilation. Although it's not as cold as in the north, now that you're pregnant and you've had a slip before, you must pay attention to keeping warm. I know, Kotum has reminded me many times. How could I dare not to listen? Dung Tu teased. You normally seem gentle, but you're as stubborn as Feng Ai. Right now, you won't even find someone to take care of you. Kotum, you're saying it again. Isn't Feng Ai already taking care of me? Besides, there's you. Every time Kotum came, she had to remind her about this, and Dung Tu felt she had become too accustomed to dealing with it. But this time, Kotum brought it up again. Probably because Feng Ai was about to leave. It seemed like she was thinking about something when suddenly Feng Ai pushed the door open, brushed off the snow on himself, and approached. Kotum is here too. I've cooked some chicken soup for Dung Tu. Kotum, please have a bowl to warm yourself up. After saying that, he placed the tray on the table and prepared to ladle the soup for Kotum. No need, I just finished eating rice. Let Dung Tu have it. Kotum waved her hand to decline. She has lost a lot of weight during this time and needs to eat a bit more. The chicken soup had been cooked for a long time. Now, as the lid was lifted, a strong fragrance spread. Although she had just finished lunch, Dung Tu still felt her taste buds stimulated. She accepted the bowl of soup that Feng Ai offered and ate it deliciously. Kotum looked at the affectionate young couple and sighed. Tell me, for so many years, I've never seen you having to go on a business trip. Why choose this time to leave? Go on a business trip. Dung Tu. holding a spoon midair, stopped and looked at Feng Ai with questioning eyes. She knew he had been summoned to the mansion a few days ago, and there had been no news recently. She had thought it was about the previous case involving the Trio family, but now it seemed like she was mistaken. Seeing Feng Ai being stared at by Dung Tu, his face became awkward. He had planned to tell her at the last minute, but he didn't expect Ko Thum to speak first. I? He wasn't good with words to begin with, and now he didn't know how to start explaining or comforting. Seeing them like this, Ko Thum knew something was up. She told Feng Ai, "This child, when he came back from the mansion, came to me and asked me to take care of Dung Tu for a while. But now, he hasn't talked to her about it yet. Your mind, usually so flexible, seems to have lost all its agility today." After speaking, she comforted Dung Tu again. "Don't blame him. He's just afraid you'll worry. This child has always been like this since he was little, knowing how to do things, but not how to say them." Dung Tu smiled awkwardly. "I know. Thank you, Ko Thum, for your concern. It's just that I'm a bit tired right now and want to rest for a bit." Ko Thum knew it was time for the young couple to enjoy some privacy, so she helped Dung Tu put the things in her hands on the table, then helped her sit on the bed. She said, "Pregnant women should rest more. Just relax, and after a nap, everything will be fine." After that, Ko Thum got up and left the room. When passing by Feng Ai, she said to him, "Comfort her, comfort her." He should have told her about this sooner. "I know," Feng Ai replied, getting up to see Ko Thum out of the bedroom door, but she was asked to go back by her, requesting him to explain this to Dung Tu clearly. Dung Tu still sat on the bed in the same position as before, her head slightly bowed, not looking at him, as if waiting for his explanation. Feng Ai hesitated for a moment, seemingly considering his choice of words, then said, "I didn't intend to hide it from you. It's just that there are still 2 days before the day the master arranged. I didn't want you to know early and worry." He left the house the day before, thinking that the Trio family case had made progress. In the end, Master Thi couldn't tolerate any tarnish on his reputation. However, the case dragged on for too long, and it would be good to resolve it soon to put everyone's minds at ease. But as he walked on the road, he heard from the arresting officers that the housekeeper next to Lady Thi had suddenly passed away. This caused a crack in his normally composed face. Lady Thi was a very gentle and elegant woman. Despite her age, the feeling she exuded was only more charming. She often did charity work, and the housekeeper next to her was also well educated by her, somewhat resembling a wealthy girl. Now, her sudden death truly surprised people. When Feng Ai arrived at the mansion to begin examining the corpse, that surprise was somewhat revealed. The deceased female, about 16 years old, died about half an hour ago with no obvious wounds on her body, not caused by external force. He turned the dead person's eyes over. Purple lips and the cheeks are noticeably reddish. Then he stabbed the body with a silver needle. Blackened silver needle, indicating death by poisoning. Regarding the poison, Feng Ai took off the deceased's shoes, and when she saw the red spots on the soles of her feet, she said, "Although those in this profession do not make conjectures, if I am not mistaken, these symptoms should be caused by the poison of Chintu-u." Chintu-u? People living in this deserted town didn't understand much about poisoning, but when they heard Feng Ai's words, Ti Huabing showed a look of sorrow and understanding. Chintu-u is not hard to find, but the price is very high. Not everyone can afford it. Since the official in the capital called Muiduk Chintu, this drug has almost become his signature murder weapon. Master? Speaking of the capital, everyone knew who it was targeting. Here, everyone knew Ti Huabing was the person targeted by the capital, albeit they didn't know the reason. But ultimately, there was a connection to the capital. In his 2 years in Pennin district, the master had implemented benevolent policies, and everyone genuinely loved and admired him. But now they all looked at him with concern. All right, Tim Ding and Feng Ai stay. The rest can do whatever they need to do. After saying this and seeing everyone's gloomy faces, he laughed. Seeing you all like this, after serving as an official for many years, small matters like this still don't scare me. You may disperse. After the three entered Thi Huabin's usual office, he spoke to the two. Before, I was in charge of Tamfop T, but I was impeached and removed from office due to false accusations. Now, I have received His Majesty's secret instructions. The court, in protecting the prince, has actually been protecting me from disgrace. Now, the time has come. Nguiduk has colluded with the Lich King in Yinzhou to rebel, resulting in the death of the Yinzhou envoy. Investigating this case thoroughly, presenting all the evidence of the crime, and bringing it to the capital with the power of the capital, we can surely capture him in one fell swoop. However, now that our family's housekeeper has been killed, it seems that Nguiduk suspects something. I cannot leave. Tim Din, you are skilled in martial arts and can escort the witness to the capital. Feng Ai, although you don't usually participate in solving cases, I know you have a keen mind. I entrust this case to you, and you will surely not fail. Pause for a moment, Thi Huabing continued. However, this journey is full of risks, and with the distance between Yinzhou and the capital, everything must be done secretly. It will take at least 3 months, up to 6 months. If you don't want to, I won't force you. Dung Tim Ding bowed respectfully before Thi Huabing. Master, I can go alone. Feng Ai has only been married for less than half a year, and his wife is pregnant. It's not appropriate for him to go. He also understood Feng Ai's situation, but Dung Tim Ding, though skilled in martial arts, lacked the cunning to deal with complicated matters. However, thinking of Feng Ai's unborn child, these matters should not involve them, so he said to Feng Ai, Tim Ding is right. Previously, I didn't consider it carefully. You should. Master, Feng Ai interrupted Thi Huabing. Despite his usual demeanor when facing significant matters, he still had his own decisions. This matter concerns the nation's affairs. How could I let personal gain lead to any mistakes? I am willing to go first with your approval. Good, good. Thi Huabing smiled satisfactorily. Feng Ai may seem aloof on normal days, but from his attitude towards his wife, it can be seen that he is truly warm-hearted. Then prepare to depart in 5 days. He patted their shoulders. Rest assured, your families will be well taken care of. Seeing the determined face of one and the cold demeanor of the other, Thi Huabing said to Feng Ai again, I will ask my wife to visit and take care of your wife regularly. I guarantee that nothing will happen before you return. Seeing Feng Ai's relaxed expression, he smiled knowingly. All right, let's all go. There's nothing to do these days, so just stay at home. Upon hearing this, Feng Ai wasted no time in turning to leave. Only Dung Tim Din hesitated, asking somewhat confusedly, Master, does this mean the investigation into Miss Trio's case will be abandoned? Thi Huabing immediately furrowed his brows, looking at him solemnly. Tim Din, you've been in the mansion for quite some time now. You must understand that there are things that, despite having the intention, are beyond our control. But Dung Tim Din still felt somewhat uneasy. These reasons were not unfamiliar to him, but recently, under Thi's leadership in solving cases, he felt that everything was different. I know what you want to say, but the law exists to maintain social stability, and it cannot guarantee absolute justice. Darkness will not disappear, and there are times when even when we see it, we are helpless. Thi Huabing didn't want to shed light on the Trio family matter to bring justice to the victim. However, the victim had truly committed suicide, The family refused to investigate. There were no witnesses, no evidence, and even the cause of death was not an issue. Relying on their speculation alone, the case couldn't be prosecuted, let alone investigated. I understand. Dung Tip Dien felt somewhat discouraged, bowing his head in resignation. Oh my, the Hoa Bin sighed. These days, stay home with your son and daughter-in-law more. Okay, outside, the weather was gloomy, and the days were getting colder. The Hoa Bin watched as the two figures walked away, rubbing his temples. Sending them was an unavoidable measure, but both had families, and if anything happened, he would truly regret it for the rest of his life. But, oh well. Fung Ngai walked along the road, feeling heavy-hearted. While at Thee's house, he had agreed very firmly, but now on the road, he unconsciously began to feel guilty. The guilt stemmed from Dung Tu. He didn't know when his feelings for her had changed, all without reason. It's just that the desire to possess her grew stronger, caring for her more. And now, thinking that he couldn't be by her side when she was pregnant, his heart was filled with remorse. The winter wind blew through him, chilling to the bone. After parting ways with Dung Tip Dien, he didn't go home but turned towards Ko Thum's house next door. When he left Ko Thum's house, the smell of food filled his own house. The words he wanted to say still stuck in his throat. He didn't know how to start the conversation, making the atmosphere even more awkward. Dung Tu had initially been waiting for his explanation, but unexpectedly, he just said he didn't want her to worry and fell silent. The prolonged silence made her unable to bear it any longer, lifting her head. However, seeing Fung Ngai now looking straight ahead with unfocused eyes, she didn't know what he was thinking. If earlier she felt a little uncomfortable, now she was truly angry. Are you really not going to say anything to me? Dung Tu's reproachful words snapped Fung Ngai out of his long thoughts, leaving him momentarily stunned. Huh? What did you say? Seeing Dung Tu growing angrier, he reacted, No, Dung Tu cut him off, her pregnancy making her temperament already hot-tempered, coupled with the pent-up worry over Fung Ngai's current attitude, sparking her anger. You didn't even tell me you had to go on a business trip. How do you see me? Do you really not care about me? Did you marry me for some other purpose? These words were too harsh. If it were the old Dung Tu, she would surely not value such a confrontational dialogue from a young woman like this. But now she couldn't help but want to speak, to ask. Since she realized she started to sink, these words had always been a pressure in her heart, now suddenly bursting forth with all her emotions. Fung Ngai felt a bit at a loss in the face of her sudden outburst of emotion. He knew she would be angry, but didn't expect it to be this severe. Don't misunderstand. I really didn't intend to hide it from you. I just didn't know how to bring it up. That's enough from the beginning. You never cared about my thoughts. I knew since you saved me, you only saw me as a possession, never respected me. And now it's even worse. Clearly this has never happened before, but you leave when I'm pregnant. These words were truly cruel. Even though this was his fault, hearing Dung Tu's words didn't make Fung Ngai's face look good either. He suppressed the anger in his heart and said, Don't think too much. Anger isn't good for the baby. Dung Tu also knew she had gone too far, but somehow she couldn't control herself, like a demon pressure in her heart suddenly being released. Seeing Fung Ngai trying to calm her down, she suddenly teared up. I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm like this. I can't control myself. You usually don't say anything to me. And now, I'm sorry. I'm just worried about you. Seeing Dung Tu like this, even though he felt a bit uncomfortable, he couldn't say anything, embracing the crying woman in his arms, awkwardly patting her back gently. It's okay. This is my fault. I shouldn't have kept it from you. Even though the two had a child, this was the first time Fung Ngai comforted her like this. Every day, Dung-tu always showed herself to be gracious and intelligent, never complaining to him about anything. Today, seeing her like this, Feng-ai realized she did care. She just didn't express it verbally. While comforting her, he chose to tell her about his upcoming departure tomorrow, to slowly narrate it to her. You can rest assured, even though this time away from home will be a bit longer, nothing will happen. At home, take good care of the baby. If there's anything, tell Kotham or find Mrs. Thee. She'll take care of you. I will definitely be back before you give birth. This is our first child. I want to witness its birth with my own eyes. Today was truly too much. It wasn't in vain that people said pregnant women were an absolute entity, not to be provoked. Dung-tu buried her head in Feng-ai's chest, feeling a bit ashamed. Yeah, I know it all. Her words carried a nasal tone. In fact, she still wanted to know why Feng-ai initially saved and married her, but she didn't dare to ask anymore. Feng-ai breathed a sigh of relief when she saw Dung-tu quiet down, pulled her out of her embrace, and looked straight into her eyes, saying, "Don't think too much anymore, okay? Just get some sleep now, and everything will be fine when you wake up." The problem still hadn't been resolved. He didn't know what Dung-tu truly cared about, but what he could do now wasn't easy. Ultimately, it was all because of love that they were so strict. If she didn't have feelings for Feng-ai, she wouldn't care so much. Crying like that took a lot of energy for pregnant women. Dung-tu was truly a bit tired, so she didn't say anything more, just pulled the blanket over herself and closed her eyes. As for what she was thinking when he was about to leave, even if she was dissatisfied, she didn't have the energy to argue anymore. Seeing Dung-tu close her eyes, Feng-ai sat by her bed for a while longer, looking at her sleeping face, her deep black eyes showing no sign of what she was thinking. Suddenly, she got up, carefully closed the door, and went outside. Outside, the snow was falling much heavier than before, covering the entire yard in a thick white layer. Feng-ai stood at the door, watching the snowflakes fluttering, then stepped into the room next door, where Dung-tu used to stay. Although since the two got married, no one had stayed in that room anymore. Everything inside was still intact. Dung-tu usually cleaned up without missing anything, so now it looked like someone was still there. Feng-ai walked to the table and sat down. Seeing the pens and paper ready for her, her hands trembling, she picked up the ink, moistened it, and began to write. When she stepped out of the room, the letter was already finished in her hand. It was a letter to Dung-tu, of course, not for now. If something happened to him on this trip, the letter would be handed to her by Kotham. If he returned safely, then the letter would no longer have any meaning. After handing the letter to Kotham and instructing her for a while, Feng-ai returned. Seeing Dung-tu asleep on the bed, a smile crept onto his lips. Now it's the hour of the rooster, and she's probably hungry when she wakes up. Feng-ai went to the kitchen, first simmering the pigeon meat that had been prepared beforehand in the sand pot, then started cooking rice. After all, although he knew how to cook because he lived alone, he usually just cooked casually for himself. However, lately, because he wanted Dung-tu to eat more, he had put a lot of effort into it, and his cooking skills had improved a lot. Feng-ai was very good at timing. Just as the food was cooked, Dung-tu woke up. Waiting for her to change clothes, he brought the food in front of her. Eat. Feng-ai remained calm, but Dung-tu still felt a bit embarrassed. Although she had just woken up and her mind was a bit fuzzy, she still didn't dare to look at him, holding the bowl of rice, mechanically stuffing it into her mouth. Suddenly feeling nauseous, she knelt down beside the bed and vomited. Seeing this, Feng-ai hurriedly ran to her side. "Didn't you feel better? Why are you vomiting again?" He put his hand on her back, gently patting. It's okay. Maybe it's because I just woke up, feeling uncomfortable. Dungtu waited for the nausea to pass before accepting the handkerchief Feng Ai offered, wiping her mouth. Feng Ai still felt a little worried, but seeing that Dungtu really didn't show any signs of vomiting anymore, she said, "Well then, that's good. Have some soup. You vomited all your last meal anyway." Thinking about not being able to be with her, she said with a worried look, "Later, when I'm not here, you mustn't hesitate to bother anyone if you need help." "Okay, got it." Dungtu just realized that Feng Ai had the potential to talk a lot, and the discomfort in her heart disappeared before his indulgent attitude. "Are you leaving tomorrow? Have you finished preparing your things? If not, let me help you. You didn't say anything to me earlier. If I had known earlier, I would have helped you prepare earlier." "It's okay. Everything is ready. You're not angry with me anymore, so I'm relieved." Hearing this, Dungtu paused for a moment, feeling that discomfort rising again, but she suppressed it, saying calmly, "Intimacy or distance between husband and wife is normal. There's nothing to worry about. Just now, I was just complaining a little." There was nothing wrong with that statement, although Feng Ai was startled to hear it. She ultimately didn't say anything more. This snowfall lasted for 3 days, and when the weather cleared, Dung Tiêm Ding stood waiting for Feng Ai at the door. The two had agreed to leave at the hour of the horse, but the sun hadn't risen yet. Dung Tu struggled against sleepiness to stand at the door to see him off. At first, Feng Ai didn't intend to disturb her. But since they shared the same bed, Dung Tu always worried about this. How could she not notice his movements when he woke up? "Be careful on the way back." Dung Tu's eyes were red. Even though they had made up after their quarrel, the past few days had still been silent to the point of tension. And now, facing separation, other emotions no longer mattered. Feng Ai looked at Dung Tu, feeling heartbroken, but unsure of what to do. Finally, in front of Dung Tiêm Ding, he hugged her tightly, kissing her forehead. "It's cold. Go inside. I'll leave right away." Feng Ai let her go, comforting her, completely oblivious to the amazed eyes behind him. This time, Feng Ai had to yield even if she had a temper, riding on the same donkey with Dung Tiêm Ding. Seeing the two men on one horse, Dung Tu's melancholy mood was somewhat eased by the sight. Living alone wasn't actually that difficult. It was just her own emotions that often made her feel terrible, and her appetite had noticeably decreased. Kotham saw her like this and was also very worried, only able to try to comfort her. But some things ultimately couldn't be changed. Especially now that she was pregnant, her emotions were even more sensitive, seeing her thin in front of his eyes. Only her belly had swelled to the size of a ball by the 5th month, and by the time the trees were budding, Dung Tu's pregnancy was 7 months along. Her thin body combined with her round belly made her look worrisome. Kotham could only sternly order Dung Tu to move in with him, in case something happened when he wasn't around to see it. Actually, during Tet, seeing Dung Tu's empty house, Kotham had wanted her to move in with him, but even though she had dinner with them, she refused to move. Although he didn't understand the reason, Kotham went along with her wishes. But now, moving was necessary. This time, Dung Tu didn't refuse. With her pregnancy, her mood wasn't good, and her morning sickness wasn't very stable. Now that she was 7 months along, she had to be more careful. Even though Feng Ai hadn't come home for Tet this year, this was still her first Tet here. She wanted to be at her own home, even though she hadn't been there long. And Feng Ai said if she was lucky, she would be back in 3 months. She hoped to stay here so that when he returned, he could see her right away. But now, he had been gone for nearly 4 months. Dung Tu didn't know when he would return, only knew that she had to prioritize the baby. Life at Kotham's house hadn't changed much. After all, it was only a wall away, Daibao often came over to talk about how he would take care of his sibling in the future, making Dongtu smile more than before. After Tet, Daibao turned 11 years old. Since knowing that Dongtu was pregnant, he had been running over to her house more often. However, Ko Thum was concerned about her health, so he didn't let Daibao bother her too much. Now that she had moved back to her own house, the little boy was overjoyed. "Fung Thum, how much longer until the baby comes out to play with me?" The boy's eyes sparkled brightly as he stared intently at Dongtu's belly. "Very soon." Dongtu gently placed her hand on her stomach, smiling softly. As Thifunyan entered the door and saw Dongtu like this, she also breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "Smiling like this is good. When your mood is relaxed, everything will be fine." This time, Thifunyan came to bring some old ginseng roots from the mansion. Dongtu's appearance truly touched people's hearts, and Thifunyan, worried, could only choose some herbs from the mansion to bring to her. After giving them to Ko Thum, she smiled and said, "It seems like it's time for you to move over here. Seeing you like this makes me feel more at ease." Seeing the concerned look on Thifunyan's face, Dongtu felt embarrassed and said, "I've been bothering everyone these past few days. Thank you, Funyan." According to Feng Ai, as a member of the noble family, it was natural for his superior to send him on a business trip. But Thifunyan still felt as if she owed her something, occasionally bringing medicine to check on her. Thifunyan took her hand. "There's no need to say such things. Your husband has been gone for so long. Your worries are just normal human emotions. It's just that we see you like this and can't help but worry. Now, there are only over 2 months left until you give birth. So, for the sake of your children, you also need to relax." "Yes, I understand. I see you smiling more, so I'm reassured. When you were pregnant and Hoabing sent Feng Ai away like this, I also felt very guilty." Thifunyan spoke, and then carefully reminded Dongtu of some things to pay attention to in the late stages of pregnancy, before leaving for a long time. "This Funyan is really kind." Ko Thum watched Thifunyan's retreating figure, expressing his gratitude. "Yes," Dongtu replied softly. She truly appreciated the concern, but didn't know what to say. She could only try to keep her emotions stable so that everyone could be at ease. However, that peace only lasted for 1 month. The spring breeze blew on her face. The warm sun shining down on her body made Dongtu feel drowsy as she lay on the small bench she had brought out to the courtyard. Ko Thum was busy cooking in the kitchen when suddenly he saw the small figure of Daibao running like the wind, almost bumping into him. Fung Thum, I found Auntie's letter in Mommy's small drawer." Look, he exclaimed proudly, waving the envelope in his hand. Daibao had been attending school for a few years now and could recognize quite a few words. Today, while rummaging through his mother's room, he suddenly found a letter that had fallen down. He looked at it closely and recognized the 2 words, Tu. Fung Thum's name was Tu, so he was sure it was a letter for Fung Thum, and brought it to her. The child's sparkling eyes looked at her, his face full of anticipation and praise, melting Dongtu's heart. She rubbed his head, smiling gently as she asked, "Daibao is very clever. Is this Auntie's letter? Daibao, where did you find it?" Being praised, the boy giggled and said, "In Mommy's small drawer, Auntie. Mommy keeps all sorts of stuff in there. Yesterday, I messed around and made Mommy angry, so she took my little wooden horse away. Today I found Auntie's letter while searching in Mommy's room. See how smart I am." Yes, Daibao is very clever, but don't rummage through Mommy's room, or else Mommy will find out and scold you, Dongtu said as she opened the letter to read. The envelope was labeled, "To my beloved Tu, clearly written by Feng Ai. Was it a letter he sent to her? Then why didn't Kotham let her see it? Or had she not had the chance? Dungtu's mind was filled with questions, but her eyes still followed the words down below, her expression growing more and more uncomfortable as she read. What was this about? When you read this letter, I may no longer be here. Was this the opening of a classic tragic novel? And what about, even though I have prepared for this journey, dangers are unpredictable? Then why didn't he tell her? Then, looking to the end of the letter, if you meet someone good for you, just take them. No need to wait for me. Dungtu could only laugh bitterly. Every day he didn't seem as generous and caring as she thought. The more Dungtu thought about it, the more angry she became, her entire expression somewhat distorted. She thought about what he said about her being in danger. If he didn't return after 6 months, it was probably more bad luck than good fortune. Now it had been almost 5 months, and her worry surged in her heart, her face at this moment truly worth seeing. Dai Bao felt that Feng Tum seemed a little scary now. Feng Tum, what's wrong? He called out from beside her, but didn't dare to come closer. It's okay. Dungtu snapped back to reality. Looking at Dai Bao, who seemed frightened by her outburst, she tried to speak in a calm tone. It's okay. Kotham was startled by the commotion outside. Fearing something had happened to Dungtu, he hurriedly ran out to see. And when he saw what was in Dungtu's hand, his expression immediately changed. Though she couldn't read, she recognized that this was something Feng Ai had entrusted to her. When Feng Ai left, she had told Kotham that this journey was dangerous, and if anything bad happened, to give this letter to Tutu. She didn't need to think to know what was written inside. Approaching Dungtu cautiously, Kotham said, Tutu, don't worry. Feng Ai will be fine. He just wanted to leave a letter in case you worried. This whole thing couldn't blame Kotham. Seeing her concerned expression, Dungtu forced a smile. Yes, I know, you don't need to worry. But even as she said this, her complexion remained pale. Kotham didn't know how to console her. So he could only look at Dungtu and appear normal, eat dinner, take a bath, then turn off the bedroom light. Almost all night, Kotham hardly slept, always worried about Dungtu's condition. Her health was never good, and now to hear such news. In the middle of the night, Kotham heard faint moans coming from the next room, growing louder with each passing moment. Worried, he quickly got up, put on his robe, and went out, hearing Dungtu's voice call out, Kotham, I'm about to give birth. About to give birth? It wasn't time yet. Kotham worried, knowing it was the letter she saw during the day that made her uneasy, so he woke Dai Bao, telling him to run to the nearby street to invite the midwife. Dungtu couldn't leave, and Kotham couldn't go, but fortunately, Dai Bao often played around here, so he knew everyone. When the midwife arrived, Kotham had already boiled a large pot of water, and Dungtu was breaking out in a cold sweat from the pain. The midwife instructed Dungtu to conserve her strength while asking Kotham if there was any ginseng in the house to make a blood-enriching tonic. Remembering the 2 old ginseng roots Fu Nyanthi had given, Kotham nodded. 2 hours later, the midwife emerged from the delivery room, her complexion not looking good. Looking at Kotham waiting outside the door, she said, Madam Dung's condition is fragile. The fetus is transverse. You should prepare yourself mentally. After speaking, she went back in to assist Dungtu in giving birth. Feng Ai had just walked in the door when he heard that, his chest aching, unable to stop Kotham from rushing straight into the delivery room. This time, he had encountered many dangers on the way, and now he could still come back. He didn't believe his Tutu wouldn't make it through childbirth. She was supposed to be alive. How could she die? He sat on the ground, holding Dungtu's hand tightly. You will be fine. It's all my fault. I will never make you angry again. I will treat you well. He repeated those words over and over, hoping she could pull through. 2 more hours passed. Dawn broke. The cries of the newborn baby echoed, followed by the midwife's relieved sigh. Thankfully, with Buddha's protection, both mother and child are safe. Feng Ngai looked at Dungtu, who had fainted from exhaustion, her eyelids fluttering, something streaking down her face. He thought, initially, he only cared about her because she was the living dead. But now seeing her gradually lose her life, his heart truly feared the sensation of her turning into a corpse. He didn't know when his concern for her, his tolerance towards her, ceased to be because she was the living dead. As for Dung Tu, in the midst of intense pain, seeing the disheveled man with an anxious, tense expression rushing to her side, in that moment, she seemed to forget all the discomfort she felt when reading the letter before passing out. Before losing consciousness, she thought, what else is there to calculate? End. He repeated those words over and over, hoping she could pull through. 2 more hours passed. Dawn broke. The cries of the newborn baby echoed, followed by the midwife's relieved sigh. Thankfully, with Buddha's protection, both mother and child are safe. Feng Ngai looked at Dungtu, who had fainted from exhaustion, her eyelids fluttering, something streaking down her face. He thought, initially, he only cared about her because she was the living dead. But now seeing her gradually lose her life, his heart truly feared the sensation of her turning into a corpse. He didn't know when his concern for her, his tolerance towards her, ceased to be because she was the living dead. As for Dung Tu, in the midst of intense pain, seeing the disheveled man with an anxious, tense expression rushing to her side, in that moment, she seemed to forget all the discomfort she felt when reading the letter before passing out. Before losing consciousness, she thought, what else is there to calculate? End.